Hey, welcome to Sleep Crime Stories. Before we begin, let me ask, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? A quick comment and a subscribe go a long way, it really helps. Now, turn down the lights, and let's begin tonight's case. Is it possible to steal a twin's identity and live their life? Twins are almost always of keen interest to others when they appear somewhere together. Not surprisingly, they have also always been the subject of intense scrutiny for scientific research as well. Such research is considered key in studying the genetics of their behavior from biology to psychology. Many twins claim to feel the mood, condition, and sometimes even physical pain of their brother or sister even when they are far away. Sometimes they even repeat the fate of each other. A special connection have identical twins because they appear as a result of division of one fertilized egg. They not only have a strong external resemblance, but even their fingerprints are very similar in the type of pattern and the number of lines, although the detailed pattern, of course, differs. The story of twin sisters Sunny and Gina looks like a script for a thriller, or even a horror movie, except that it happened in real life. The girls were separated in early childhood and later they were reunited. But instead of joy, they were seized by a strange feeling that grew into envy and constant rivalry in everything. Each of the girls considered her sister to be more successful and lucky, and the constant striving to be better at any cost resulted in a real tragedy. Sisters Sunny and Gina on April 30th, 1974, in a simple family living in one of the provinces of South Korea, were born twin daughters who were given the names Sunny and Gina. Spouses lived modestly, if not to say poorly, and the appearance of their two children seriously undermined the family budget. Parents constantly scandalized, and when the girls were not yet 2 years old decided to separate. In this case, the children during the divorce process they simply shared. Father took Gina and went to a neighboring city, and the mother with Sunny remained in her native province. The former spouses did not communicate for almost 4 years, and all this time the sisters also did not see each other. However, in 1980, Mr. Khan met with a woman who decided to marry and create a family, but his new lover immediately disliked Gina. The woman put the question on the edge and forced the man to return the child to his mother, agreeing to become his wife only in this case. In the fall of the same year, he brought the girl to his ex-wife and just left her there without going into explanations and without even paying attention to the situation in the house. Then he left and never took any further interest in the fate of his children, nor did he help them financially. The mother of the girls by that time had serious problems with alcohol, had no stable job, and was addicted to gambling, which caused her to incur huge debts. The woman could leave home for days at a time, leaving her daughters alone with a pack of cheap convenience foods or even no food at all. They were hungry, afraid, and seemed to have no one else in the world but each other. Nevertheless, the sisters' relationship was rapidly deteriorating. They began to fight over literally everything and constantly competed for their mother's attention. Often their quarrels ended in fierce fights with bruises, abrasions, and torn pieces of hair. The mother never separated her daughters or tried to reconcile them. As she herself said in an interview many years later, fights between siblings were considered normal in Korea, so she did not intervene. Escaped to the United States of America in the early 1980s, Mrs. Han, unable to pay off her mounting debts and fearing for her life and the safety of her girls, decided to flee the country to the ocean to escape creditors and try to make a fresh start. The woman wanted to go to the sunny state of California, which she had only seen in pictures and magazines. She packed only the bare necessities in her suitcase and bought one-way tickets for herself and her children. They settled in Irvine, a city in Orange County, California, and immediately faced a host of problems. They had no friends, acquaintances, or relatives to help them in any way. Mrs. Han did not know English and therefore could not get a job, and the girls, without knowledge of the language, had a very difficult time in school. The family was barely making ends meet, living on a meager allowance, and the future seemed ghostly and frightening. It took several years for the mother and children to adapt to the new place, but when life seemed to be getting better, the woman became addicted to alcohol and gambling again. The situation repeated itself, but now she also began to show mental disorders. She was unable to raise her own daughters and wanted to put them in an orphanage or foster home. In 1986, Mrs. Han's sister moved to California with her husband. The couple had no children of their own, and after learning about the situation in the family of a relative, she herself offered her to take the 12-year-old girls to her for upbringing. Mrs. Han accepted the offer gladly, but did not even talk to her daughters about it. She quickly packed their belongings in a suitcase, took a bus to Sunny and Gina in a neighboring town, and simply dropped them off at the bus stop at her sister's house, telling them where to go. The girls were confused, scared, but they were welcomed with open arms at their aunt's house, and soon their lives began to resemble a fairy tale. Auntie and her husband did everything they could to make the sisters feel comfortable and in need of nothing. Sunny and Gina ate enough for the first time in their lives, wore beautiful new clothes, and attended a prestigious school where they were taken by car. Nevertheless, not only did the relationship between the sisters not improve, but it escalated to the breaking point. They studied together in the same class and constantly competed in everything. The girls were the best students, and each of them tried to bypass her sister in this. They also played sports, trying to perform better than their sister, shared friends, competed for the attention of teachers and guardians, and liked boys. This rivalry seemed to really stimulate and spur the sisters on, pushing them to be the best at everything. They did become the best students in their school, showed high performance in sports, were meticulous about their appearance, and were an example to others. The only thing that never happened between them was love. Each of the sisters thought that the second sister got the best, so she did not want to fall behind and give in. It should be noted that Sunny was more open, friendly, and communicative, so it was easier for her to make friends or relationships with boys. Teachers treated her better, and guardians, without realizing it, showed more tenderness and care to her. But Gina seemed to be driven by anger and hatred. She would go out of her way to beat her sister and prove to everyone that she was better, from the army to the alcoholic to the gambler. After high school, the sisters' paths diverged. Gina decided that she could realize herself as a soldier and signed a 4-year contract, joining the U.S. Air Force. The girl was hardy, well-prepared physically, but she soon realized that the military service she did not like at all. Here reigned strict discipline and order. Orders were not discussed, and the soldier did not actually belong to himself. After a year, she made her first attempt to break the contract, but she failed. After another 6 months, she went on a deception, saying that her father was seriously ill and she needed to take care of him. The management demanded proof in the form of a medical certificate, which, of course, she could not get anywhere. So, another 6 months or so passed, and Gina was literally suffocating without any personal freedom. Her unit was transferred to Lackland Air Force Base, located in Behar County, Texas. It is the only place for the U.S. Air Force and Space Force enlisted for basic military training. In addition, Lackland is best known as the only military training location for the U.S. Air Force. Many people dream of going here, but for Han, this base seemed like a real prison. Gina didn't want to wait another 2 years for her contract to expire, so she decided to cheat again. She went to a senior officer and informed him about her unconventional orientation. It should be noted that it was 1994, and at that time such a scandalous statement was a good reason for immediate termination of the contract. Freed from her obligations, Gina returned back to California and settled in the suburbs of Los Angeles. Pretty 20-year-old girl quickly found a job in one of the popular casinos, with a salary of about $20,000 a year. The sum was small even for that time, but tips sometimes exceeded her daily earnings several times over. For a while, it seemed that Gina's life was getting better. She was making good money, could afford to buy clothes and cosmetics in brand-name stores, rented a place in a good neighborhood, and had her own, albeit used, car. But that didn't last long. Soon, she became addicted to hot drinks and began to use them almost daily. But that wasn't the worst of it. One day, Han, after a work shift, after picking up her paycheck and receiving a decent amount as a tip, decided to try her luck and sat down at a slot machine. Within a couple of hours, she lost all the money she had earned. But instead of regret, she woke up a real painful excitement. She wanted to win back and hit the jackpot. Every day after the end of the shift, she drank and sat down at the machines, where she lost all the money. At first, she gambled only her paycheck and tips, but soon she began borrowing money from colleagues and friends, which caused her to get into debt. Gina did not realize that she was repeating the fate of her mother, who also had a problem with alcohol and gambling, and for this reason, the woman once left her native country, fleeing to America with 2 children in her arms. Gina's addictions worsened. Soon, she stopped lending money because she simply did not pay them back, and she descended into banal theft. For the first time, she stole cash from the purse of her colleague, but the latter, having discovered the loss, felt sorry for Han and did not report her to the police. When the situation was repeated, the thief was brought to administrative responsibility. But she got off with only a fine and a suspended sentence. A few months later, she stole her aunt who raised her, visiting her. In mid-1995, Gina was convicted of theft and for the first time received a real sentence, going to prison for 3 months, but got out early after less than a month. After that, she was in the sight of the police a couple more times for drunken debauchery, but spent no more than a few days behind bars. Successful twin. Sunny went to college after high school and then became a student at a prestigious university. She studied law, received a scholarship, made a lot of successful and wealthy friends, revolved in high society circles, and lived that annoyingly perfect life which these days brag on social networks. She rented a spacious apartment in a luxury apartment complex with its own swimming pool and gym, located in an upscale neighborhood. Sunny shared the rent with her close friend and fellow student Helena Smith, who was the heiress of very wealthy parents. Han had her own expensive white BMW car, and she was dating a handsome and promising young man from an intelligent family, who was studying at medical school and dreamed of a career as a surgeon. It seemed that she was the complete opposite of her sister, achieved everything she dreamed of, and a long and happy life was ahead of her. About her twin sister, Sunny almost did not remember. They have not seen and did not communicate since graduation from high school. She knew from her aunt's words that Gina had already been in jail a couple of times for theft, had problems with alcohol, and got into debt because of gambling. The girl was too busy with her studies, relationships, and building her perfect life. She did not try to find her sister, somehow contact her and offer help. However, in early 1996, Gina unexpectedly contacted her sister and asked for help. Is it possible to misappropriate someone else's life? In April 1996, Gina called Sunny and asked to see her. The sisters saw each other for the first time in 4 years, but did not feel any joy about it. They sat across from each other in a cafe, and the people around them did not take their eyes off them, because it seemed like one person sitting in front of a mirror. Gina complained to her sister that she was in serious trouble and didn't know what to do. Gina was unemployed, but with a lot of debt. She had nowhere to live and no one to turn to. Sunny listened carefully to her sister and genuinely felt sorry for her. She suggested that Gina stay in her apartment for the time being, without even consulting Helena. The same day, Gina moved into her sister's apartment with only a bag and her belongings. Of course, Gina had heard that Sunny was not poor, but she had not expected to see such a luxurious and cozy apartment in a comfortable residential complex, where there was everything one could dream of. Naturally, Gina did not pay for the apartment, and for more than a month, she simply lived at her sister's expense. Every day she was more and more eaten up by envy and hatred. She constantly thought about how her life could have turned out. How was her sister better than her? At this time, Gina had a seemingly crazy thought. After all, she and Sunny were identical in appearance, and no one but her mother and aunt had ever distinguished them. Gina wondered, what if the twin just disappeared, and she could live her perfect life? In her opinion, no one would even notice the switch, as well as the disappearance of Gina herself, who had almost no friends, and her relatives frankly disliked her. Soon, such thoughts turned into an obsession. Gradually, an insidious plan matured in Gina's mind. She carefully watched with whom her sister communicates, where she goes, how she speaks and dresses, exactly copied her hair, makeup, and demeanor. Gina tried to socialize with her sister's friends as much as possible to learn more about them, so they wouldn't notice the switch. The sisters still did not find common ground, and constantly quarreled. As the main argument, Sunny threatened to evict her sister every time, but since she had nowhere else to go, she just gave up and stored up her hatred. On August 18, 1996, after another scandal, Gina had been drinking, and while her sister and a neighbor went somewhere else, she went through the apartment and, taking all the cash found there, went to the casino. When Sonny and Helena returned home, they found the place a mess, and the money missing. They immediately realized what had happened and went to the police, because they could no longer tolerate the antics of Gina. The girl was arrested the same night right in the casino. She was found guilty and sent to prison for 6 months, but after 2 months the conditions of her imprisonment were relaxed, and the convict could leave the prison for 6 hours a day to go to work, but had to return to the prison at night. She complied for 2 weeks, and then decided to escape to complete her plan, an insidious plot. Once free, Gina hitchhiked back to Orange County. She was not a dangerous criminal, so the search for her was not a full-time endeavor. Since Gina had no money, she was forced to spend the night in a homeless shelter in a very disadvantaged neighborhood. She wanted to kill her sister as soon as possible and take her place, but she couldn't do it alone, and it was impossible to hire a hitman on credit. Then Gina recruited 2 local teenagers, whom she met in the same troubled neighborhood. They turned out to be Archie Bryant and his buddy Joni Siret. The girl promised to pay each of them $100 in case of success. The guys prepared for the crime thoroughly, bought rope, duct tape, and even somewhere got a gun, which however was not loaded, but could be used for intimidation. On November 15, 1996, Gina, having borrowed money from acquaintances, rented a used Ford Mustang, on which she and her accomplices were to go to her sister's house. All was to happen on Wednesday, November 20th, in the afternoon, when Sonny, according to the calculations of her sister, would definitely be home alone, and to make a reconnaissance, and to make sure of it, the intruders bought a pack of magazines so that Joni, under the guise of a salesman, would look into the apartment and check who was inside. The plan seemed flawless, the roles were written, and each of the criminal trio knew what he had to do. But suddenly everything went wrong, as they had originally intended. A failed assassination attempt. On the appointed day, around noon, a Mustang pulled up to the apartment complex where Sonny lived and 2 guys got out. Archie stealthily stood aside, while Joni went with the magazines to the victim's apartment. He knocked, and the door was opened by Sonny, who, however, did not bother to knock, and saying she didn't want anything, simply slammed the door in his face. Joni went back to his assistants, told them everything, and they discussed the details of the plan once more. Somehow, no one had any doubts that the girl might not have been home alone, only because she had opened the door herself without calling anyone. Having finished discussing the nuances, the young men took the rope, duct tape, and gun from the car and went back to the apartment. Around 1 o'clock, Joni called the apartment again, and Archie stood a little ways away, preparing to kick the door down as soon as Sonny opened it. By then, however, Sonny had gone to take a shower, because she was about to leave for an important meeting. Her neighbor was sitting in the living room in front of the TV, and when she heard the bell ring, she didn't even want to open the door. But the unexpected visitor was persistent, so after a couple minutes, Smith gave up and headed for the door. As soon as the lock clicked and the door began to open, the guys, without ceremony, kicked it out, knocked the girl to the floor, and only then realized that it was not Sonny in front of them. Threatening with a gun, they tied Helena up, duct taped her mouth shut, and then Joni ran to Gina to ask her how to handle the situation and whether to let the witness live. He took with him a bank card lying on the dresser in Sonny's name. At this time, Sonny, still in the bathroom, heard a noise and cautiously peeked out. She decided that burglars had broken into the house, grabbed the cell phone in the hallway, and went back into the bathroom and started calling the emergency services. All she had time to do was give the address and tell them about the armed robbery, when the connection was suddenly cut off, and the door to the room swung open with a powerful kick. Archie pulled a terrified Sonny out by the hair, tied her up with rope, taped her mouth shut, and threw her on the floor next to a bound Helena. The friends expected to be tortured to find out where the money and valuables were in the house, or to be abused, but just a few minutes later, the police arrived. Joni and Gina were still in the Mustang when the police arrived at the house. First, 3 law enforcement officers ran past them, and a few minutes later, another car came to help. Since it was a hostage situation, all forces were rushed to the call. A police officer who was running by was radioed the number of the apartment, and this was heard by the intruders sitting in the car. Gina got out of the car and yelled that she was Sunny Han. The law enforcer looked at her, but didn't understand what that said. He asked her to wait and ran to the scene, where his colleagues had already managed to disarm the attacker and rescue the hostages. When the police officer entered the apartment, he was shocked and bewildered. In front of him, frightened and crying, sat the same girl he had just run past on the street. He asked her name, and when she said her name was Sunny Khan, the police officer doubted for a moment that what was happening was real. He thought he was going crazy, because the same person could not be in two places at the same time. The man, telling his colleague that he needed to check something, jumped back into the yard, but the Ford Mustang with the girl and her accomplice had already disappeared. The good twin and the bad twin? When Gina saw the police arriving and heard the apartment number being called on the radio, she realized that the attempt had failed. Then she took a desperate step, jumping out of the car and identifying herself by her sister's name. The girl wanted to make herself look like a victim, saying that the real criminal is now in her apartment. But the hurried officer simply did not listen to her and only asked to wait. Naturally, Gina did not wait. She and Johnny went to the nearest ATM, where they were able to withdraw a few $1,000s from her sister's stolen card. And then the criminals rushed towards the Mexican border. But first they needed to change their car for something less conspicuous. At the car dealership, Gina introduced herself with her sister's name, but when filling out the paperwork, she made the mistake of writing her real name. The employees thought this was very strange and asked her to wait for a while to settle the formalities, then informed the management, and they called the police. When arrested, Gina continued to insist that Sunny was her, and the other sister was pretending to be her. The identity of each of the girls was established only by fingerprints, but even after that, at the investigation and in the courtroom, they both continued to introduce themselves as Sunny Khan. At first glance, the Khan sisters seemed to be typical good and bad twins, but a deeper examination of their history revealed that this was not the case at all. While Gina suffered from addictions, regularly got into trouble, and had several criminal records, Sunny built a happy and successful life. However, after the sisters' paths diverged, and they stopped constantly competing with each other, Sunny lost her main incentive. She entered a prestigious university, but in the second year of her academic performance began to fall, and the girl lost her scholarship. To be able to pay for her studies, she got a job as a dancer in one of the nightclubs in the neighboring city, and carefully hid it from her friends and boyfriend. Sunny tried to maintain a picture of an ideal life, which in reality she was no longer living. Trial and sentencing, Gina and her minor accomplices were charged with conspiracy to murder Sunny Khan. The girl was also accused of trying to take the identity of her twin sister, whose name she introduced herself even during the hearing. In general, watching the process was curious and creepy at the same time because the sisters, being on the same emotional wave, simultaneously began to cry, experienced panic attacks, and at one of the sessions simultaneously lost consciousness. Gina claimed she didn't intend to kill her sister at all, but only wanted to get her belongings out of her apartment. Archie and Johnny were supposed to help her with that, but the guys decided to play gangsters and scare Sunny and her neighbor, but a little too much. The defendants pointed out that the gun was not loaded, so no real harm would have been done to the girls. On November 20th, 1997, a year after the attempted murder, the court reached its verdict. The jury took into account that Gina was previously convicted multiple times, escaped from prison, and at the time of this crime was wanted. Taking all of this into account, Gina Khan was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 26 years in prison. Her accomplices Archie Bryant and Jonia Sirat received 14 and 8 years respectively, the aftermath and cultural reflection of the case. In May 2018, a California state commission granted Gina's attorney's petition, and she was released after serving 21 years. It is worth noting that she received support from Sunny in the matter of parole, because her sister was able to forgive her. Once free, Gina moved into the house of her elderly mother, whom she now takes care of. The story of the Khan sisters was widely covered in the press, became a topic for numerous issues of popular talk shows, and also formed the basis of a number of documentaries and feature films. Still with me? Good, that means you're ready for the rest. Don't forget to hit subscribe if you want more cases just like this one. Malibu Creek State Park is a scenic recreation area 25 miles from downtown Los Angeles that has been used as a backdrop for popular movies and television shows. But when a young man was murdered in Malibu Creek while camping with his two daughters on a summer afternoon in 2018, it sent the Southern California community into hysterics. During the investigation, it became clear that this crime was connected to a string of unsolved incidents that had occurred earlier in the same area. This information spawned all sorts of universal conspiracy theories and public paranoia. Our story today is about what happens when lightning strikes in the most terrifying way imaginable. Let's begin. In the morning, police officers knocked on a young woman's house. She opened the door, and when she heard, "Are you Tristan Baudet's wife?" she knew the news would be sad, and she was not mistaken. Two police officers informed the woman that her husband had been shot dead in his tent during the night. She left in a hurry to the place of tragedy because their daughters remained there. It was a long drive, and tears spontaneously flowed from her eyes. Erica Wu was the fourth of 5 children in a family of immigrants from China. She lost her father early and saw how difficult it was for her mother to raise her children alone. Erica grew up a quiet and responsible child who keeps everything under control. When she met Tristan, he turned out to be the complete opposite of her. He didn't think too much and didn't worry about anything at all. He just did what he wanted to do. Tristan grew up in Fresno, California. His parents were natives of the area. His father sold insurance and his mother was a teacher. His parents divorced when he was only 3 years old. He was young but old enough to remember it. Tristan and Erica met in high school. In the beginning, they were just acquaintances. But as time went on, their relationship grew closer. They spent a lot of time together, studied together, and shared their joys and sorrows with each other despite being complete opposites of each other in personality. Soon something more grew out of their friendship and they started dating. Erica went to Stanford University and Tristan went to the University of California, San Diego. But they kept in touch, emailing every day, talking on the phone every night. They didn't see each other as often as they would have liked, but they found a way to stay together. In their second year of medical school, Erica and Tristan got engaged, and a year later, they decided to settle in San Francisco. In 2008, they were married in Tilden Park in front of all their friends and family, in a large rented room with glass walls and a stone clearing outside. After a year, Tristan and Erica moved to Long Beach in Southern California and then to Irvine, where Erica began work at UCLA, and Tristan found a job with a large pharmaceutical company. It took them both a while to adjust to Orange County, but that's where they were truly happy. Their first daughter was born in 2014. Their second daughter was born 2 years later. Fatherhood made Tristan happy. He became a lark, waking up with the girls, making them breakfast, and letting Erica rest. His passion continued to be hiking and camping. He took every opportunity to go to the woods or mountains as a family. He regularly took his daughters on hikes and bike rides. After completing her internship, Erica found a job in the San Francisco Bay Area, and the family began making plans to move back north. They found a house in a suburb south of San Francisco with all the necessary infrastructure nearby and a good school for their daughters. Tristan found a new job with a pharmaceutical company in the same neighborhood. They set a date to move at the end of June, a week after Erica was due to take her qualifying exam. Tristan and Erica's son-in-law, Scott, offered to pick up their daughters from home the night before so she could study for the exam in peace. On June 21, 2018, Tristan had breakfast with Erica and their daughters and then packed up to go to his car. At the garage door, he hugged and kissed Erica, wished her good luck on the exam, and promised to celebrate with her when she returned the next day. Tristan, Scott, and the girls drove north to Malibu Creek State Park. They got there toward evening and were assigned a place to camp at the gate. When they arrived, Tristan looked around and decided that they could find a much better place. They surveyed the campground and found another spot that Tristan thought was perfect. They set up camp there, taking turns looking after the girls and setting up the tents. The day was full of excitement. The excitement of the trip to the park, the first impressions of setting up the tents and cooking over the fire, had exhausted the girls, and as soon as it was dark, Tristan put them to bed. The men sat around the fire for a while longer and then dispersed to their tents, saying goodbye until morning. The night was quiet and dark. The sky was covered with clouds, and the moon did not illuminate the land. In the early morning hours of June 22nd, Scott awoke to a loud popping sound. The man got up to check where the sound was coming from, but it was followed by several more pops. He figured it was fireworks, but hearing a baby crying from Tristan's tent scared him and went to check it out. Cattle walked over to the tent and called out to Tristan several times, but he didn't respond, and the crying only got worse. He went inside and shined his flashlight into the tent. Scott was soothing the younger girl and kept calling Tristan's name. When he approached the man, he found him unconscious. Tristan was pale and unresponsive to light. No pulse was palpable. A pool of blood had formed next to Tristan's head. Scott tried to administer first aid to his friend, but it was too late. Tristan Baudet died at the scene. Scott called rangers who were working at the park and reported the incident. Around 4:40 a.m. on June 22, 2018, police received reports of a shooting at Malibu Creek State Park. Tristan and Erica's daughters were not touched by the shooter. One fatal bullet, like a bolt of lightning, struck Tristan in the head, who was killed instantly. The second bullet struck the torso of a man who was already dead. Bullet holes were visible in the tent. It looked as if some unknown person had fired a gun aimlessly into the tent at dawn, and the girls were miraculously unharmed. This fact gave the impression that the shooter did not care who he shot. Law enforcement officers quickly arrived at the scene of the tragedy and began interviewing vacationers who were in the park and could have seen the intruder. But, to the horror of the patrolmen, no one saw a man with a gun. Lengthy interviews with vacationers and park employees did not answer the investigators' questions. Since the investigation began, police have made almost no statements to witnesses. But later, one witness did come forward. A woman who was in a tent set up next to Tristan and Scott at the time of the attack admitted that she heard 5 shots in a row around 4:45 a.m. and wanted to call police immediately, but was very scared, thinking the shooter might be nearby and would shoot her too. After 20 minutes, she decided to leave the tent and called emergency services. Her call was the second call, as after the ranger's call, rescuers were already on their way to Malibu Creek. While examining the scene, investigators noticed the caliber of the weapon was consistent with a hunting rifle, and such ammunition tends to retain killing power, meaning the bullet could have traveled quite a distance. A search was initiated for a location within that radius from where the shooting had originated. Detectives, with the help of service dogs, combed the area in and around the family tent with the assistance of police and forensics, but nothing suspicious was found to help solve the case. No arrests were made, and detectives were unable to provide any information about the suspect or his motives. Investigators were asking the same questions: who could have shot the scientist, and where could the young father have made deadly enemies? Could it have been related to the industry in which he worked and conducted his research? Dr. Tristan Baudet was a research scientist who worked for a pharmaceutical company. Before his death, he questioned the safety of vaccines. He was working on safer vaccines, and his work did cause controversy in pharmaceutical industry circles. But this version of premeditated murder because of Tristan's research has remained unproven. Interviews with numerous witnesses continued, and after checking many facts, it became obvious that the murder of Tristan Baudet was no accident. This attack was moreover, 2 of them had been carried out on the very tent camp that Tristan and Scott had used. This led to serious concerns that a sniper was on the loose. Malibu Creek Park was closed to the public. The public was outraged at the irresponsibility of the authorities who had not given serious consideration to the earlier attacks in the park because they were not fatal. Tourists were outraged by the news. It turned out that such popular place is an area that is periodically shelled by some intruder. After the first cases with injuries, no one closed the park or investigated it. Tourists were not notified of the incidents. In fact, the police wrote off every incident in the park as hunter-related accidents. After Tristan's murder, the park was still closed, and the public arrived in shock at the carelessness of the security services. The safety of park visitors is more important to us than anything else, city officials said, and soon closed Malibu Creek Park. However, the neighborhood did not become less dangerous for locals after the park's closure. Police officers received complaints of gunfire in that area about 9 times. The search for the perpetrator continued, but there wasn't much evidence at the scene. Authorities confirmed that none of the campers saw anyone entering the campground at the time. It became apparent that the shooter was inhabiting the park. The family of Tristan Baudet, who died on June 22nd, has expressed condolences to the relatives of the victims and has chosen to remain in the shadows from all the hype that has been stirred up by the public. Using the last chance to get information about the shooter, authorities offered a $30,000 reward for any information about the crimes. But despite the reward offered for information about the possible perpetrator, the motive and the perpetrator remained unknown for months. Investigators had no choice but to begin unraveling the tangle of mysterious gunshots, because the death of a young father, Tristan Baudet, fit into a series of violent crimes that occurred in those places in recent years. The roots of this tangled story go back to November 2016. The first incident happened to biologist James Rogers. He went to Malibu Creek Park for a camping trip, set up camp, and fell asleep in a hammock. He was awakened by a searing pain in his right arm. The man thought he had been bitten by some rodent or bat and went to the hospital. The doctors gave him a rabies vaccination and sent him home. As his arm began to heal, he noticed pieces of metal in the wound that looked like gunshot. The second incident occurred in January 2017, when Melissa Titangelo and her lover parked their car in the parking lot of the same Malibu Creek Park and fell asleep. In the middle of the night, they heard a loud gunshot and the smell of burnt metal. In the morning, they discovered a hole in the back of the car from a shotgun blast. Locals were whispering, perhaps a dangerous criminal with a firearm was walking around in their neighborhood. But at the time, police attention was not drawn to these episodes. In the summer of 2018, people began to recall other scary incidents from years past. There was talk that in 2009, 24-year-old Mitris Richardson went missing in the remote hills of California. Almost a year later, her remains were found a few miles from a railroad station. In 2017, 20-year-old Elaine Park went missing. She was last seen in the California town of Calabasas. A few days later, her car with her personal belongings was found on the side of the road along the Pacific coast in Malibu. The American woman's body was never found. A month before the latest crime, which took place in a tent in Malibu Creek Park, another mutilated corpse with signs of violence appeared. The deceased was lying in a tent across the street from the park. Investigators confronted with the string of attacks labeled Malibu Creek Park as a dumping ground for the bodies. At first, the crime seemed to have no other connection, but as the investigation progressed, new details began to emerge. The driver of a Tesla electric car, who has remained anonymous, said that 4 days before Tristan Baudet was killed, around 4:30 a.m., someone fired shots at his car. However, Los Angeles detectives have never been able to prove that the crimes are all connected. The townspeople discussed the possible motives of the perpetrator in fear and advised each other not to leave doors and windows open. Locals refused to believe that a serial criminal had taken up residence in such a beautiful area where a celebrity could be found on every corner. Some speculated that the man's death could have been a ridiculous accident when someone was once again practicing shooting. Perhaps Tristan Baudet was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Did the man's death have a connection to the missing women and the mutilated bodies of vacationers? But unfortunately, police had no leads they could tell the town's terrified residents about. In August, investigators held a meeting and officially admitted that the investigation had reached a dead end. In desperation, people speculated. Perhaps he was killed because of a particularly valuable and secret project Tristan was working on, or perhaps his death was connected to the drug cartels and illegal drugs he was allegedly growing in remote corners of the park. The only thing to do was to wait, because if there is a criminal, he is sure to leave a trace. And so it was. In addition to violent crimes near Malibu Creek Park, someone stole food and broke into abandoned buildings. The criminal was repeatedly caught on hidden cameras. He was followed, but the sinister bandit could not be apprehended. A sketch of the burglar has been compiled. Amidst the minor offenses, gunshots continued to ring out in the hills. About the same time, A park employee was driving through Malibu Creek and saw a man on the side of the road who asked for a ride. The stranger's face resembled a sketch of a suspected thief, so the driver turned him down. Instead, he reported the incident to police officers. Patrolmen in 3 helicopters combed the park area until dusk, to no avail. Then another attack on the community center occurred. The perpetrator broke a glass window and vandalized a vending machine in search of food. Police officers immediately responded to the call and tracked down the bandit from fresh shoe prints. A 42-year-old man named Anthony Rauda, dressed in all black, was apprehended. A rifle was found in his backpack. According to unofficial reports, the intruder was homeless and had been stealing food to survive. One of his relatives stated that Anthony had been arrested twice in the past 4 months. He was initially detained for illegal border crossing but was soon released. The relative also added that Anthony Rauda had been living in that neighborhood for 10 years and was afraid of the people around him. On October 10, 2018, nearly 4 months after the murder of Tristan Baudet, alleged perpetrator Anthony Rauda was taken into custody in a canyon near the park with a rifle in his backpack. Sheriff's authorities described him as a survivalist outdoorsman. He was first arrested in connection with several thefts in the area and later charged with the murder of Tristan Baudet and involvement in other shootings. Anthony Rauda had previously served time in state prison for possession of explosives and then for possession of a loaded handgun, which is illegal for people convicted of felonies. He was on probation at the time of his arrest, authorities said, during the investigation of Tristan Baudet. And before Anthony Rauda's arrest, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department said there had been at least 7 other unsolved shootings in the area since November 2016. In early January 2023, state authorities did indict Anthony Rauda for all the shootings recorded in the Malibu Creek area in recent years. In total, he had to answer for 10 attempted murders, 5 burglaries, and a crime against Tristan Baudet. Police seemed to have found a scapegoat and were ready to close all the cases by pinning them on one man. Authorities believe the suspect was also involved in other unsolved crimes committed nearly 10 years ago. This 10-year blood fever would make for a Hollywood movie, said one of the detectives who worked on the case. Indeed, the whole story is like the script of a new blockbuster movie, but in 2 parts, where in the second part, the real culprit of the crime will still be found. Anthony Rauda was charged with murder, 10 counts of attempted murder and 5 counts of burglary. Detectives said the charges were based on a comparison of bullets found at the scene of Tristan's death and other locations where gunfire was heard. His case has been postponed until he can find representation, according to the report. There were also questions about Anthony's ability to stand trial. For a long time, he remained in custody and insisted on his innocence. In November 2018, Anthony Rauda did appear in court. However, at the first hearing, the man had to be removed from the hall, as the defendant began to shout, use profanity and bang on the walls of his cell. When the bailiffs removed him, he demanded the dismissal of his court-appointed lawyer. Locals cherished the hope that Tristan Baudet's killer had finally been found, but the gunshots in the middle of the night in Malibu Creek never stopped. A jury found Anthony Rauda guilty of 1 count of attempted murder and 1 count of shooting at a vehicle 4 days before Tristan Baudet's death. The jury acquitted Anthony Rauda of the first-degree murder charge, but found him guilty of second-degree murder. He faced 40 years to life in prison. A statement from the district attorney's office said a Los Angeles County Superior Court judge sentenced 46-year-old Anthony Rauda to 119 years in prison. But was the man punished by state law? Could Anthony Rauda have been so disturbed to have fired indiscriminate shots at people in the mountains over the past few years? There seemed to be evidence to suggest so. What about the gunshots that people continued to hear at night, even after the suspect was arrested? A local Malibu journalist, who was skeptical from the start, continues to doubt the state's version of events. Personally, I think the shooter is still out there somewhere, she says. There's something convenient about pursuing a burglary suspect. She says, perhaps a result of the political events following Tristan's death. Everything that's happened is 1,000,000% coincidence, Erica Wu believes. Tristan was in the wrong place at the wrong time. Of course, I'm also wondering, why did this happen to us? Who's to blame? In late December 2018, Erica Wu, the the wife of the deceased Tristan Baudet, filed a complaint against authorities in Los Angeles and California. She complained against law enforcers for failing to warn locals about the dangers of recreation in Malibu Creek Park, despite a series of deaths. The woman demanded $90 million in compensation. Police acknowledged the lawsuit but declined to comment. Nevertheless, the question remains, could what happened to Tristan Baudet have been prevented? Obviously, the motive for the crime was never established. Serial criminals usually memorize everything, keep trophies, or leave distinctive footprints. But Anthony was so disorganized, so unpredictable. It's a miracle he was identified at all. So some social outcast was blindly taking revenge on all people, shooting whoever God sent, venting his anger for no particular purpose. He didn't even know if his victims were killed or if they even existed. Most likely, this story of the Malibu Creek shooter will have a sequel after all, and we hope that it will end with the real criminal being punished and no new victims appearing. Thanks for watching, guys. Subscribe to my channel. There are many shocking stories ahead of you. No body, no case. It was said in English law after the miracle of Campton. But in our story there is no body, but there is a case. On a November morning in 2011, Galina Kolyadzinskaya returned home to her rented apartment on Uberava Street in Vladivostok and disappeared. 3 years later, her boyfriend Victor Cohen was convicted of her murder. But no physical evidence of Galina's alleged death was presented at the trial, and her parents still believe she is alive and are waiting for her return. In April 2024, Victor Cohen was released from prison and the case regained popularity, dividing the public into two camps. Some believe that Victor served time for a crime that did not happen, while others are convinced that the sentence received for murder is too short. Let's find out together how a high-profile criminal case about the disappearance and murder of a man with no evidence progressed throughout the country, causing controversy among observers and the creation of groups to search for Galina. Viktor Polovov was born July 9, 1988 in Vladivostok. He took the surname Cohen in 2012. Parents divorced when the boy was very young, so his upbringing completely fell on the female shoulders of his mother and grandmother. In 2005, he graduated from high school, gymnasium of the Far Eastern State University. He entered the Institute of Mass Communications of the same university at the Department of PR, but after 6 months he dropped out. In 2007, Alona Kolyadzinskaya introduced her classmate Victor to her sister Galina, who was 3.5 years older than him. Galina Kolyadzinskaya was born on April 22, 1985 in Rostov-on-Don. At the age of 13, her parents moved to Vladivostok. The girl was distinguished by a bright appearance, stood out theatricalized manner of dressing. She was slender, well-read, and very artistic. She graduated from school, studied at an art school, then entered the Faculty of Design of the Far Eastern Federal University. Victor was smitten with her, and for the first time he truly fell in love. Both of them dreamed of entering the Theater Institute, so Victor dropped out of school and they left their native Vladivostok for Moscow. Galina failed the entrance exams, but Vitya did not. But out of solidarity with his favorite girl, he decided to return home. Both returned to Vladivostok, where they started living together. On his return, Victor learned about his grandfather's death and the inheritance he had left him. With this money, the lovers rented an apartment in the city center, bought a car each, and decided to invest the remaining sum in a profitable business. They tried to organize a shop for the production of car tires, opened a network of donut shops, and even resold churchkila, but all projects quickly went into loss, which led the young couple in despondency. Over time, disagreements between the young people began to destroy their relationship. The couple quarreled violently, and it did not do without violence. Once Galina's friends witnessed a quarrel between them, when Victor lifted his girlfriend by the neck. However, Galina sometimes did the same. She could hit her boyfriend or break the furniture in their rented apartment. Eventually, Galina started going to nightclubs more and more often, and Victor became interested in other women, running away from the problems in his current life. On the morning of November 14, 2011, Galina returned home after another visit to the club and was very much on her merry way. Victor was not at home, which made Galina furious, and at 6:43 a.m. she called him and demanded his immediate return. 15 minutes later, Victor was already in their rented apartment. A quarrel took place between the young people, as a result of which they decided to finally part ways. Instead of the previously donated car, Galina demanded 300,000 rubles from Victor, and then she would leave and not bother him. Victor gave her the money, and she left the apartment, as it turned out, forever. The next day, Galina's parents got worried and started calling her, but her phone was switched off. Victor did not answer their calls either. Only on the second day after Galina left, he contacted the girl's mother and told her that there had been a quarrel. She had extorted a large sum of money from him, then packed her things and left. "You will never see me again. Don't look for me. Tell my mom that everything is fine with me." Galina's last words from Victor's words. He also told Galina's mother that he repeatedly called her after she left, but the girl did not answer his calls either, because the phone was simply turned off. At first, friends and parents of the missing Galina were not surprised by her sudden disappearance, because she was famous for her flighty behavior and could disappear for several days. But 3 days later, Galina Kalyadzinsky's father wrote a statement to the police about his daughter's disappearance, and the law enforcement agencies began to search for her. Specialists zealously took up the case, and Victor was first of all summoned to the station for a conversation. He was the last person to see Galina and could clarify many points of interest. During the interrogation, Victor did not deny that he often quarreled with his girlfriend, whom he had grown cold to and had another woman. Victor said that he was fed up with his scandalous girlfriend, who in a fit of jealousy could raise her hand against him or pour yogurt on his car. Once, being in an inebriated state, Galina said she would tear her rival's hair out if he continued to date her. "I didn't kill Galina. Yes, we quarreled with her. She packed her things, took all our money, 300,000 rubles, and left. Where she went, I don't know," Victor insisted. The investigation team also examined the apartment where the young people lived together, both their cars, but no traces of blood or other evidence pointing to Galina's murder were found. Victor was even tested on a lie detector. During the interview, the young man was confused in his testimony, but his involvement in Galina's disappearance was not proven. Having questioned Galina's acquaintances and neighbors, the police decided to refuse to initiate a criminal case, as no signs of corpus delicti were found. However, Galina had never traveled outside Vladivostok. She did not have a foreign passport. Victor collected Galina's belongings and gave them to her parents, and he himself moved in with his new girlfriend Tatiana and started a new life. The feelings of young people were so strong that in 2012 they decided to get married. It was then that Victor finally got rid of his father's surname, which had been weighing him down since childhood. He liked the Cohen option, which was offered by his future wife, who heard the beautiful surname in one of the movies. Everyone forgot about the missing Galina Kalyadzinsky for several years. 3 years of married life of a young married couple. Cohen flew quite happily. They traveled a lot, went to the mountains, and lived a quiet and measured life. But everything changed when the case of Galina's disappearance was reclassified as a murder case, because for 3 years she never showed up. Galina's mother, Elena Kalyadzinsky, did not worry much at first. She knew that her daughter was a creative and fickle nature, could go somewhere just by mood. Perhaps this explains why the case did not become a criminal case for almost 3 years, because no one insisted. In June 2014, based on the materials of the inspection on the fact of Galina Kalyadzinsky's unknown disappearance, a criminal case under the article murder was initiated. The girl was put on the wanted list as missing, and employees of the crime investigation department began to work out various versions of Galina's disappearance, from going abroad to work in the modeling business, to murder. In the course of working out the latter version, Kalyadzinsky's ex-boyfriend came to the attention of the police. Turned out that Cohen and Galina often quarreled. The girl made him jealous scenes because of his relationship with another woman. There was also information that Galina was planning a trip to Korea. In her youth, she had already worked as a model in China and was going to continue her career in this field. Ex-boyfriend Victor Cohen became the main suspect, because he was the last person who saw Galina alive. The testimony regarding the facts of Galina's disappearance, which Victor and witnesses had previously given at various stages of the case, also gave reason to believe that Victor might be involved in the crime. On July 23, 2014, Victor was summoned for questioning, where he was detained and taken to the investigation unit. There he confessed that after another quarrel, in the morning of November 14, 2011, he strangled Galina, subsequently dismembered the body in the bathroom, put the remains in 3 plastic buckets, took them to a wooded area near the factory Variag, where he built a fire with tires, burned the body, and scattered the ashes in different places. Victor Cohen behaved confidently during the interrogation. He spoke to the investigator on did not choose expressions and swore a lot. He frankly, as at a friendly conversation, told the story of his life from birth to the present day. Experienced operatives were amazed at the coolness and cynicism with which he recalled how he dismembered and burned Galina. The former lover sat in front of the police officers with his feet on the ground and smiled. He felt invulnerable. Victor lamented to the investigator that he had originally intended to boil the body in a steamer, put it through a meat grinder, and flush it down the toilet. But he eventually abandoned this method, fearing that the sewer system would be clogged and he could be identified. At the same interrogation, he stated that he strangled Galina because she was interfering with his new relationship. According to Victor's memories, his ex-girlfriend was an unconventional person who craved attention. She often disappeared in nightclubs, and because of the fiery temper could make a loud scandal at home. In conversations, Galina often mentioned that she would like a beautiful life of an escort model, and at the same time did not want to believe the arguments that without the provision of services of an intimate nature, such work is impossible. Victor accepted all the eccentric actions of his friend and continued to consider her a pleasant and interesting person until a certain time. From Victor Cohen's interrogation, I was taken by annoyance. I was standing near the coffee machine. I took a coffee. As I stood there, something in me turned. There was this one person, and that was it. I went home, walked over to her sleeping, said, "I'm sorry," and started choking her. She woke up, started to struggle. I strangled her for a long time. Then I left the house and cried. It wasn't fear, it was frustration, loss. I realized what I had done, but as a rational person I did not lose my temper. After the interrogation, the operatives took Victor to the house where he lived with Galina Kolyadzinskaya in November 2011 for an investigative experiment. In the apartment, Victor demonstrated how he strangled Galina on a folding sofa that night. According to him, she did not resist, as she was drunk and fell asleep. When he was convinced that she was dead, he left the apartment in a hurry and went to his car, where he came up with a cold-blooded plan to get rid of the body. Victor learned about the intricate way to get rid of the body from a documentary about India, where the bodies of the deceased are burned, and quite often use car tires for this ritual to reach the right burning temperature. Victor told the operatives that it was much easier to kill and dispose of the body than he had imagined. Late at night, Victor was taken to the very vacant lot where he allegedly disposed of Galina's remains. In pitch darkness, Cohen had to point out the specific place where he had burned the girl's body. According to human rights activists, he was taken to a place where there were no traffic or CCTV cameras, so that there was no way to prove his innocence. The case also lacked important details, which Victor himself pointed out repeatedly. It was not clear how and what he used to cut up the body, because an ordinary kitchen knife could not be used. Further, it was not quite clear how he managed to put Galina's remains in 3 buckets, and how he carried these buckets out of the entrance in full view of everyone, and why no one paid attention to it. Then the investigation questioned the Bygalovs, who rented the apartment to Galina and Victor. They admitted that they were unable to contact Victor after they learned that the police were in the apartment. When they arrived to check their accommodation, they found the apartment empty. There were no tenants or their belongings. On the ceiling they found brown-colored splatters, as the couple thought it was from coffee or tea, and there were black streaks on the wallpaper, most likely from storing car tires. But the detainee, Victor Cohen, did not know that his interrogations were recorded by a video camera. When he realized that he had told too much on camera, he recanted his testimony, stating that during the interrogation at the Operative Investigation Unit on Karabashiva Street, they forced confessions out of him using unauthorized interrogation methods, and when his wife Tatiana came to the same station, Victor was threatened that they would harm her as well. He added that the story he told during the hour-long interrogation was made up by the operative officers. and that the place where the remains were burnt was determined based on his phone billing that night. But was torture really torture? In the CCTV footage from the investigation unit, Tatiana Cohen drove up to the building at 6 p.m. She was not allowed inside, so she stayed outside. 20 minutes later, Victor was brought in for questioning, and Tatiana also entered the building around 6:30 p.m. The recording of the interrogation started at 6:38 p.m., tortured for 8 minutes, whipped out a confession, made up a colorful and bloodthirsty story in great detail. On August 11, 2015, as a result of the first court hearing, Victor Cohen was found guilty of the murder of Galina Kaliadzinskaya, and by the court verdict of August 11, 2015, he was sentenced to 9 years, 10 months of imprisonment, with serving his sentence in a penal colony of strict regime. After Victor Cohen was charged with murder, his wife Tatiana became his most faithful defense counsel, convinced of his innocence. All Vladivostok residents actively followed the story and even went out to rallies in support of Victor Cohen. People divided themselves into defenders and accusers. Victor's wife continued to fight for her husband and did not lower her hands, even after the terrible news that her spouse would have to spend almost 10 years behind bars. The revealing video, which was kept in the criminal case, was shown during the court session. The case became a high-profile one because during the court proceedings, Victor said that confessions were beaten out of him by interrogators with the help of threats and torture, as evidenced by hospital discharges, where he was diagnosed with concussion and ear barotrauma. A young, handsome man with huge brown eyes had strangled, dismembered, and burned his girlfriend in cold blood. No one could believe it. Charismatic guy could become an actor. He was even admitted to the Moscow Theater Institute. True, as we already know, Victor refused to study. Friends, classmates, just acquaintances from all sides described him positively. Lawyers built their defense on the fact that in the apartment, where, according to the investigation, the murder took place, and at the place where he burned the body, not even traces of human DNA were found. There were even witnesses who allegedly saw Galina in the city after she disappeared. The public was fueled by Galina's mother, Elena Kaliadzinskaya. The unhappy woman sincerely believed that her daughter was alive. In all interviews, she said that Victor was not guilty, and Galina would soon come back and tell why she had disappeared and where she had been all this time. After the guilty verdict, Victor Cohen continued to call the circumstances of the murder presented to the investigation completely invented. After all, no biological traces were found at the alleged place of burning the remains of the victim. The forensic examination, conducted in Cohen's car and apartment, did not give convincing results either. The defendant was also sided with Galina's parents, who were convinced that their daughter was alive. The defendant's lawyer, Ivan Mykolev, said at the time that the investigation had no objective evidence. The examination of the soil at the clearing, where his client allegedly burned the body, also yielded nothing. The examination did not show any biological traces. Later, it turned out that some of the case materials were also missing. Inspection reports of the apartment and the car, lie detector data and video from the camera, which were obtained back in 2011. Cohen's family and defense believed that the case was reclassified in order to relieve himself of responsibility for the unsolved crime. Galina was never found. Not agreeing with the court verdict, Victor filed an appeal and began to claim that he was not involved in the commission of the incriminated crime, and the confession was forced out of him by law enforcement officers. Tatiana Cohen launched a large-scale campaign in support of her husband. She appeared on various talk shows and programs, gathered rallies, actively maintained social networks, where she actively collected money for a lawyer, in return, posting fake reports. On December 7, 2015, the Court of Appeals overturned the verdict due to violations of the Code of Criminal Procedure, and the case was sent to the Court of First Instance for a new trial in a different court. After the retrial by the Court of First Instance, Victor Cohen was also found guilty of the murder of Galina Kaliadzinskaya, and by the verdict of June 21, 2016, he was sentenced to 9 years and 9 months of imprisonment with serving his sentence in a strict regime colony. The sentence was again appealed, but this time the Court of Appellate Instance on November 28, 2016, upheld the sentence and Victor Cohen went to serve his sentence. After the appeal, Tatiana withdrew from all affairs, divorced Victor, and remarried. As it turned out, her role as a wife was a carefully planned game. because Tatiana began a new relationship immediately after Victor's detention. Nobody expected such a turn of events. Tatiana herself refused to comment. Despite the fact that the body of Helena Kaliadzinskaya was not found, the court ruled on the basis of circumstantial evidence against Victor Cohen, and there was plenty of it. First of all, this confession, in which Victor says that after the murder, he decided to get rid of the body by grinding it in a meat grinder. He went to the shopping center Maxim for it, where he actually bought a meat grinder and a pressure cooker in the Domatechnica store. In 2015, the investigation made a seizure of records from the database of the store about the purchases of meat grinders for November 14, 2011, and in one of the records was the surname Polovov. The time on the billing and the receipt from the database of the store coincide. Also, the store administrator confirmed in court that there was no tampering with the database for the purpose of falsification. Further, Victor Cohen's cell phone billings played an important role in the verdict. On November 14, 2011, from 11 a.m. to 6 p.m., Victor stayed in the apartment. Most likely, he dismembered the body, and at night he took buckets with the body to the woods near the Variag plant. Victor repeatedly reported that he called Galina after she left, but her phone was unavailable. However, Victor's phone billing showed that he did not call Galina between 10 a.m. and night. The last phone conversation he had was with Tatiana at 11:51 p.m., just in the neighborhood of the Variag plant. Moreover, if you listen to the court sessions where the billing of Galina and Victor is announced, it is obvious that after Galina's disappearance, her relatives, friends, even Victor's mother called her, but not Victor himself. Given the fact that everyone is looking for Galina and Victor is under suspicion, if it were him, anyone would send at least a message to his missing friend. But Victor didn't do it. Obviously, he knew there would be no answer. Also, in the case were sales receipts for 3 20-liter plastic buckets with lids and locks, bought the same day as the meat grinder. Unfortunately, there is no last name on the receipts, so it is not proven that it was Victor Cohen who bought them. But how could Galina fit into 3 20-liter buckets? Another piece of circumstantial evidence was the enamel in the bathroom. Victor dismembered Galina in the bathtub, having covered everything with foil to hide the traces of blood. He then scrubbed the tub with a metal brush with such force that he erased the enamel. In the confession video, Victor voiced that Galina had ruined the enamel on the bathtub by regularly cleaning it with alkaline or acidic products. Witnesses who claimed to have seen Galina at a supermarket in Vladivostok and at Sheremetyevo Airport in Moscow after she went missing turned out to be false. According to the airport's CCTV cameras, a similar girl was not found. A criminal case was opened against one of the witnesses under the article on giving false testimony. While studying this case, the only and the main question was spinning in my head. So why were no other clues found? It is impossible to anticipate and hide even the smallest details. After all, if Victor really killed Galina, at least some traces must remain. And the answer was simple. It's time. For the first few days, Victor wouldn't let the police into his apartment. He immediately moved in with Tatiana, and the owners of the apartment knew nothing about what had happened. He finally took his belongings only on December 8th. No one opened the door to the police officer who came to check on him. The police did not get into the apartment until 12 days later. They did not use luminol but simply fixed the situation. On December 10th, the owners of the apartment started renovation. The 2 cars were inspected only on December 27th. Let me remind you that Galina disappeared on November 14th. Consequently, Victor had about 3 weeks to clean the apartment and cover his tracks, and a month and a half to clean the interior of the car. Why then were neither traces of DNA nor Galina's remains found? According to the conclusion of experts, it is still possible to completely burn the body in artisanal conditions, and that's exactly what happened in this case. The black pieces, which Victor said he scattered in the forest near the place of burning, could be scattered by wild animals, thus depriving the investigation of the last possible evidence. Victor burned Galina, who had been dismembered into pieces, on tires, giving the right temperature to burn the bones. All that was left of her were black charred bone fragments. He did not specify the exact location of the bonfire, citing the long time lapse. He had forgotten, in order to find the remains of the body would have to sift through a sieve a huge area of the forest. But why, if the killer is found? For more than 13 years nothing is known about Galina Koliadzinskaya, and the last day of her life is described from the words of the man who was convicted for her murder. Assuming that Victor Cohen did not kill after all, where could Galina have gone? Experienced retired investigators in an informal conversation with journalists say that in today's world, it is almost impossible to get lost unless you are a professional in the intelligence service. In 13 years, Galina had to be found somehow. Even if she lived abroad under a false name, she could not help but leave traces. After all, even to replace her documents, she would have had to be fingerprinted, which means she would have been identified. Victor Cohen married someone else, claims torture, but never once mentions that Galina will definitely come back, that he is waiting for her, and she will definitely prove his innocence. But he knows perfectly well that the main witness is not there and cannot be. Not once did Victor say that he served time innocently, that 10 years of his life were stolen from him, that he lost his beloved wife Tatiana, who preferred not to wait for him from prison. He has no grudge against the system, no desire to fight for his honest name, to sue, to prove his innocence. He knows that the body will never be found. He burned it to the ground. There is no evidence. This gives him the opportunity to make up all these versions of the disappearance, and he behaves just as if he had served time for his crime. Now he is clean. What claims can there be? He was convicted, he served time, he has redeemed everything. An innocent person would not be so cold-blooded as to incriminate himself, and even in such detail. Despite the already closed case, many people all over the country still can't believe what happened. They are still looking for Galina on their own. For this purpose, they place ads on forums and periodically post photos of girls who resemble her very much, because Galina's parents are still waiting for her to come home. A young mother who never believed her husband would take her life. Manipulation is a type of social and psychological influence where one person seeks to change another person's perception and behavior for their own interests. Manipulators typically follow similar patterns, resorting to deception, blackmail, and moral or physical abuse. Often, their methods can be so intricate and cunning that the victim doesn't realize they are acting in the manipulator's interest. This frequently happens when the victim is in love with the manipulator and trusts only them. The case of Maria Fernanda Quesada was classified as femicide, a deliberate crime against a woman by a man. The most horrifying aspect of this crime was that it was entirely predictable, and those close to the girl considered the tragedy just a matter of time. Maria herself was afraid of her abusive husband but loved him and wanted to keep the family together for the sake of their children. So she gave in to his manipulation. She blindly trusted her partner and did not sense danger when he invited her to a fateful meeting. Maria Fernanda Quesada. Childhood, family, and early years. A girl named Maria Fernanda Quesada was born on June 18, 1994, in the town of La Garita, located in the Guanacaste province in northern Costa Rica. She was the only child in the family, and her birth was a true miracle for the Quesada couple. Maria's mother had been treated for infertility for many years, and doctors had given up hope, claiming she would never have children. However, despite all the forecasts, she managed to conceive and gave birth to a healthy child. Her parents showered her with love and care, striving to protect her from all troubles and provide her with everything she needed. From a young age, Maria dreamed of having a large family with brothers and sisters, but her mother's health prevented her from having more children. So Maria remained an only child. The girl then decided that she would one day create a large, happy family of her own and have at least 3 children. The Quesadas worked hard and, by the standards of their native province, were considered well off. They aimed to give their only daughter the best education possible and fostered the development of her talents and abilities in every way. The family lived in a spacious, cozy home, and Maria had the opportunity to study music and attend art school. Maria had warm and trusting relationships with all family members, but she was especially close to her maternal aunt. Her mother's younger sister was only 6 years older than Maria, so they grew up as close friends, sharing secrets and being almost inseparable from a young age. Quesada excelled in school, had a creative nature, and was passionate about painting and sculpture. Those around her described her as a kind, bright, empathetic, and friendly person, always ready to lend a hand. She always had many friends, easily connected with people, and was very attractive. Single mother at 18, Maria started dating a boy she had known since school. Their relationship developed quickly. The young man seemed reliable and loving to Maria, but everything fell apart when she told him she was pregnant. The young man, who was her age, was completely unprepared for family life and raising a child. He immediately suggested she terminate the pregnancy, and when she refused, he declared that their relationship was over. Maria was devastated, but still hoped that after the baby was born, the father would change his mind and come back. However, by then, her ex-boyfriend was already seeing someone else and wanted nothing to do with the son he had fathered. Maria's main support came from her parents and aunt, who helped and financially supported her and her son. The young mother knew she couldn't rely on her relatives forever and needed to provide for her son on her own. She began looking for ways to earn a living, wanting her work to bring her joy. Soon, she discovered online lessons on soap making and crafting decorative candles from wax. Being a creative person, Maria was drawn to this activity and saw great potential in it. Maria threw herself into making handmade candles and soap, selling her products online. She created social media groups to advertise her goods and took individual orders for custom candles and soap, tailored to customers' specific preferences. Her business quickly gained momentum, her social media following grew rapidly, and with it, so did her orders. She continuously improved her craft, aiming to become a top-notch artisan, and dreamed of saving enough money to open her own shop. Meanwhile, Maria also started teaching online soap-making classes, earning a decent income. She continued to live with her parents and son, saving for her own home, and dreamed of getting an education. A frightening suitor, Maria worked hard, but she never stopped dreaming of meeting a worthy man with whom she could build a strong, happy family. Someone who would love her growing son as his own. Her loved ones shared this dream, but when she brought her new partner into their home, they were filled with anxiety and fear for her future. In the fall of 2017, Casada went to the city to buy supplies for making soap and candles. While she was shopping, a charming young man named Esteban Rivera Vargas approached her. He paid her a few compliments, saying he was captivated by her beauty and couldn't resist coming over to introduce himself. Esteban seemed polite and genuine, quickly charming Maria and earning her trust, so she agreed to take a walk with him and have coffee. After a brief conversation, Maria gave him her phone number, marking the beginning of their unexpected romance. Esteban was 12 years older than Maria, but she didn't see the significant age difference as an obstacle to their happy future. She fell in love with him from the day they met, though it was a mystery to those around her what had won her over. Vargas was the complete opposite of Maria. He was harsh, rude, constantly used foul language, and had many bad habits. But most importantly, he never spoke about his past. Officially, he didn't have a job, but he had substantial savings that many suspected were obtained through dishonest means. Esteban owned a firearm, which he kept in the glove compartment of his old pickup truck. He rarely parted with the pistol but never explained why. Maria suspected that her lover might be connected to the criminal world, but she was too afraid to ask him directly. She also knew nothing about his past relationships. About 4 months into their relationship, Maria decided to introduce Esteban to her family. She was very nervous about her parents' reaction, and it turned out she had every reason to be. Esteban behaved provocatively, was rude, used foul language, and any questions or remarks provoked anger and sudden outbursts. He openly frightened Maria's parents, and as soon as he left their home, they began urging their daughter to break off the relationship, fearing for her safety. However, Maria was not just in love. She was truly blinded by her feelings and refused to listen to any arguments. She naively believed that her love, care, and support would help her lover manage his fits of rage, that he would eventually calm down, settle, and become a good husband to her and a caring father to her son, as well as to the children they would have together, which she longed for, a family like his. A couple of weeks after meeting Quesada's parents, Esteban decided to introduce Maria to his family. He invited her to a family dinner at his mother's house, but the event turned into a nightmare for Maria. The Vargas family members were just as hot-tempered, aggressive, and arrogant as Esteban. They used foul language, communicated loudly, and any argument could instantly escalate into a fight. They treated their son's new love interest with disdain, making derogatory remarks, and even comparing her to his ex-girlfriends. They didn't like that Maria already had a child from a previous relationship, and they made no effort to hide their feelings. Maria held back tears of hurt and humiliation with all her might. To make matters worse, Esteban's relatives also had a fondness for strong drinks, and when intoxicated, they became even more aggressive and unpredictable. Maria found them cruel and malicious, a sentiment she candidly shared with her parents. Her father and mother once again tried to convince their daughter to break up with Esteban and stay away from him and his family. However, Maria remained adamant, believing that things would settle over time, especially since Esteban tried to behave himself when she was around. A hellish marriage in December 2018, Maria told her partner that she was expecting his child. Esteban was not overly thrilled by the news, but he agreed that it was time for them to make their relationship official. The couple got married on April 6, 2019, when the bride was 4 months pregnant. They had a beautiful wedding with a white dress and a beachside ceremony. After the wedding, the newlyweds moved into a small house owned by Esteban. But from the very first days of their married life, he began to show his true colors. He no longer held back his outbursts of rage, threw tantrums over nothing, and didn't hesitate to use his fists. Insults, beatings, and humiliations became routine in their home, all witnessed by Maria's 5-year-old son. For several months, Maria not only endured all this, but also kept it secret from everyone. She avoided visiting her family so they wouldn't see the bruises on her face and body, wore long sleeves even in the heat, and carefully concealed the marks around her eyes with makeup to avoid attracting neighbors' attention. However, she grew increasingly fearful for the life of her unborn child, and worried about how this situation would affect her older son. Maria believed that after the baby was born, Esteban would soften and fatherhood would do him good. She endured daily abuse, accusations, and humiliation, all while Esteban skillfully shifted the blame onto her, reminding her that he had accepted her with a child that no one else wanted. He expertly manipulated her emotions, knowing that the woman in love wouldn't leave, understanding how to frighten her and make her comply. Casada was terrified of being alone again, this time with 2 children, and this became Esteban's primary lever of control. However, shortly before the birth, after another brutal beating, Maria hastily packed her things, took her son, and fled to her parents. They were shocked by her appearance, as there wasn't a single unmarked spot on her body, and urged her to go to the police, but she flatly refused. Caring father in the last few weeks before giving birth, Maria lived in her parents' home, still hoping that the birth of her child would improve the situation, so she was in no hurry to file for divorce. Her family was less optimistic and urged her to end the marriage as soon as possible, but she wouldn't listen. On August 11, 2019, Maria gave birth to a son, and she immediately informed her husband by phone. Esteban rushed to the hospital within 15 minutes, looking happy yet bewildered. He got on his knees, begging his wife for forgiveness, pleading with her to return to him, and promising that everything would change now. Maria believed him and went home with the children after being discharged. It's needless to say that Casada's parents were shocked by their daughter's decision. They understood that this was just a ploy and manipulation by their son-in-law, but Maria refused to listen. It all ended in a major argument, with Maria stating that if she had to choose, she would choose Esteban. Her parents didn't want to spoil their relationship with their only daughter, or lose the chance to see their grandchildren, so they had to accept her decision. For the first few months, the new father did spend nearly all his time with his wife and newborn son. He surrounded them with care and even took on some household duties. However, he treated his stepson with a cool detachment. The stepfather didn't mistreat the boy, but it was evident that he was uncomfortable interacting with the child, although he tried not to show it. Moreover, Esteban officially got a job, and it seemed like he was doing everything for the well-being of his family. Maria couldn't be happier, as everything was now unfolding exactly as she had dreamed. But her happiness was fleeting and short-lived. Nonetheless, this brief respite even made Maria's relatives reassess their opinion of Esteban and believe that he had indeed changed for the better, Under one roof with a monster, the family idyll lasted precisely 1 year. But shortly after celebrating their son's first birthday, Esteban seemed to snap. All the anger, rage, and cruelty that he had been suppressing burst out, turning their home into a real torture chamber. He mercilessly beat his wife, broke several of her ribs, and nearly deprived her of an eye. In terror, Maria fled to her parents, who once again begged her to go to the police, but she refused. A few days later, Esteban came, apologized, and asked her to return home. To everyone's astonishment, Maria agreed, explaining that she still believed in her husband and hoped they could return to their previous happy life. Over the next few months, Maria repeatedly ended up in the hospital with serious injuries, but she always blamed everything on ridiculous household accidents to avoid involving the police. Neighbors regularly heard screams and shouting from the couple's house and even witnessed the man beating his wife. However, Maria always begged them not to call the authorities. People in the area were afraid of Esteban because they didn't know what to expect from him and feared he could attack at any moment. It wasn't until November 2021, when the situation reached a breaking point, that Maria, fearing for her life and the safety of her sons, contacted the police. She could no longer live under the same roof as a tyrant, manipulator, and outright sadist, so she moved back into her parents' home with her children. Moreover, she managed to obtain a restraining order against Esteban, prohibiting him from approaching her and the boys. Quesada documented the injuries, and doctors recorded numerous bruises, contusions, and abrasions of varying stages of healing on her body, indicating systematic and brutal beatings. Her relatives, as well as neighbors, confirmed that Vargas regularly assaulted his wife and threatened her with harm. As a result, the court forbade him from approaching his wife and contacting their child without her consent. However, the restraining order didn't deter Esteban, who regularly showed up at Quesada's house. He would wait for Maria to step outside and insist on talking, but she would always rush back inside to avoid him. Eventually, she only left the house accompanied by relatives, fearing an attack by her husband, a brutal attack and child abduction. Maria filed for divorce almost immediately, and now the couple faced a complicated process of dividing their assets and deciding custody of their son. She filed a lawsuit for domestic violence, supported by medical reports documenting her injuries and witness statements from neighbors and relatives. She hoped this would help her gain sole custody of the child. It was clear that Esteban had his own plans, and on March 3, 2022, despite the court order, he came to the house of his still legally married wife's parents. He looked completely calm, behaved politely, and asked to speak with Maria. Her parents tried to turn him away, but he was persistent. A few minutes later, Maria herself appeared at the door and agreed to talk to him privately. It's unclear what exactly Esteban said to her, but he was very convincing, and Maria agreed to go with him to their shared home to settle some issues. Moreover, she took their son with her because Esteban convinced her that he missed the child and wanted to spend time with him. Her parents were adamantly against their daughter and grandson going anywhere with this dangerous man, but Maria assured them that nothing bad would happen. She took the child, got into Esteban's car, and that was the last time her parents saw their only daughter alive. The couple started arguing in the car. By the time they reached their house, Esteban was yelling and using foul language at Maria as witnessed and overheard by the neighbors. The couple, along with their young son, entered the house, where the situation escalated. The shouting didn't stop, and soon it was accompanied by loud crashes, as if furniture was being broken and dishes were being smashed. Then came the sound of a child crying and Maria's desperate call for help. Neighbors called emergency services, and a man living across the street rushed over to help. As he approached, the front door flew open, and Esteban appeared on the threshold, covered in blood. In one hand, he held the crying child, and in the other, a blood-stained knife. His gaze was wild, and his face twisted in rage. The neighbor backed off, fearing for the boy's life, while Vargas jumped into the car and sped away at high speed. When the police arrived, they found the mutilated body of a young woman with no signs of life. Maria lay in the kitchen in a pool of her own blood, with multiple stab wounds. Blood splatters were everywhere, on the walls, furniture, and even the ceiling, indicating the extreme brutality of the attack on the victim. Forensic experts counted 11 stab wounds on the deceased's body, most of which were concentrated on the upper torso and hands, which she had used to shield her face. It seemed that Esteban had attacked her from behind, catching her by surprise. This was evident from the 3 wounds in the neck and shoulder area from behind. Maria likely tried to escape, but her husband caught up with her and continued to stab her in the chest, head, and hands. Her body was found lying on its back, with the final stab wounds inflicted near the heart. Search for the criminal and the abducted child. There was no doubt about who had dealt with the unfortunate woman, but where was the criminal, and where did he take the child? A few hours later, Esteban's abandoned car was found on the side of a deserted road. Inside were traces of blood, and on the floor lay the weapon used in the crime, bearing the man's fingerprints. For obvious reasons, the criminal decided to get rid of the car, which had been declared wanted. He could have hitchhiked, taken a bus, or stolen another car. However, the options of public transport and hitchhiking were quickly dismissed, because the man was in bloody clothes, which would have undoubtedly raised questions or suspicions. Most likely, he stole a vehicle to escape. An emergency manhunt was launched, as the police had strong reasons to believe that the criminal would attempt to cross the border into Nicaragua with the child within hours. Alerts with photos of Esteban and his young son were sent to all border checkpoints, and by evening, the fugitive was apprehended. The criminal had even managed to find a clean shirt somewhere, but bloodstains from the victim remained on his jeans and sneakers. As expected, he tried to leave the country in a stolen vehicle with his young son in the car, but he was arrested at passport control. The man did not resist and immediately asked for a lawyer. A gun belonging to Esteban, with his fingerprints, was also found in the stolen vehicle. Crime investigation. The crime was initially classified as femicide, a crime against a woman due to her gender, which is considered a particularly serious offense in Latin American countries, and is usually punished with life imprisonment. All the evidence pointed to Esteban: the bloody knife with his fingerprints, the bloodstains on his clothes, and the neighbors' testimonies confirming that besides him, Maria, and the child, no one else was in the house. Moreover, the investigation revealed that the man had previously been charged multiple times for assaults and causing bodily harm. However, the only eyewitness to the crime was a 2.5-year-old boy. So, the criminal and his lawyers adopted a specific strategy. Esteban claimed that Maria had attacked him, and he was only defending himself from an enraged woman, panicking and grabbing the knife. The man argued that he didn't even remember how he inflicted the wounds, and only realized what had happened when his wife fell silent. At the same time, the Vargas family tried to tarnish the deceased's reputation, calling her a bad mother, a terrible wife, a troublemaker, and unfaithful. The defendant's relatives claimed that Maria provoked Esteban, attacked him, and this ultimately led to the tragedy. They did everything to portray the criminal as a victim of circumstances. The lawyers insisted that the greedy Quesada family intended to take all his property and deprive him of the chance to see his son. During the investigation, it was even necessary to exhume the body of the victim, who had been buried a week after the crime. Independent experts refuted Esteban's and his defense's claims that Maria had attacked him first, once again confirming that the first 3 blows were inflicted on her from behind. Trial and sentence. The trial of the criminal began only in March 2023, meaning the defendant and his lawyers had plenty of time to build a convincing defense. However, various activist organizations fighting for women's rights supported the Quesada family, joined by crowds of people demanding just punishment for the criminal. The deceased's eldest son, who was 9 years old at the time, could testify in court and spoke about the stepfather's cruel treatment of his mother. The younger child, who witnessed the crime, was only 2.5 years old at the time. Psychologists worked with him and determined that the boy had a deep-seated fear of kitchen knives, screaming, "Daddy, don't," whenever he saw one. The child mentioned that his father had hurt his mother and that everything turned red. These materials were submitted to the court, but the child was not brought into the courtroom to avoid further trauma. Numerous witnesses, including neighbors, relatives, and acquaintances, testified against Esteban, recalling how he had shown aggression toward his wife at various times. Dozens of people had also regularly seen bruises and contusions on the young woman's body, and shortly before the start of the divorce proceedings, the police had documented signs of beatings. On May 15, 2023, Esteban Rivera Vargas was found guilty of the premeditated crime against his wife and sentenced to 36 years in a maximum security prison. Custody of the deceased woman's 2 children was granted to her relatives. What keeps a marriage going when there's no love, trust, or basic respect? Some try to hold the family together for the kids, others fear public judgment and care about others' opinions, while some are stopped by religious beliefs or a mix of these factors. But sometimes, the desire to save a marriage at any cost can turn into a horrible tragedy. The story of Jacqueline and Paul Krimble isn't unique, but it drew widespread attention due to its cruelty, greed, and cynicism. The criminal was dubbed the Black Widow and put behind bars, but her daughter confessed in a candid interview that her mother continued to ruin lives even while in prison. The relationship of Jacqueline and Paul Krimble. Jacqueline, or just Jackie Mary Bennett, was born on December 18, 1974, in County Armagh, Northern Ireland, as the youngest of 2 children in an ordinary middle-class family. From childhood, she was erratic, spoiled, defiant, and sometimes even aggressive. In her teenage years, Jackie's behavior got worse, becoming completely unmanageable, but her family blamed it on adolescence, hoping she'd grow out of it. In high school, she met Paul Krimble, who was 3 years older and her complete opposite in every way. But as they say, opposites attract, and this principle seemed to work perfectly here. Paul was a modest and shy young man from a religious family, a good student, considered very talented and promising. Jacqueline's boldness, energy, and confidence attracted him. She was the first, and likely the only, girl he had serious feelings for. Jackie's parents approved of her choice and welcomed Paul, believing he would make their daughter more calm, sensible, and reasonable. Sometimes it seemed like her family treated Paul better than Jackie herself, accepting him as a family member from the day they met. However, Paul's parents were cautious about his choice but didn't stop the young couple's relationship. School friends also noted that the couple seemed incompatible. Jackie often provoked conflicts, preferring to solve them with physical force, while Paul tried to resolve everything peacefully, avoiding violence, and was considered friendly, open, and very responsible. He always kept his word and was ready to help others at any moment, described as a kind, sensible, and mature young man beyond his years. At 17, Jacqueline got pregnant by her boyfriend and immediately told him. At that time, she was in her final school year and 20-year-old Paul was already a college student. Upon learning this, Paul immediately declared his readiness to marry her and take full responsibility for her and the child. Jacqueline wasn't ready for family life or raising a child, but terminating the pregnancy was out of the question. Neither Paul nor his religious family would allow such a grave sin. So Paul bought a ring and officially proposed to Jackie, who accepted. The couple had a modest wedding in 1992, celebrating with their closest family and friends. Interestingly, a few days before the event, Paul confessed to his best friend that he and Jacqueline were too different in every way, doubted the sincerity of her feelings, and was even afraid of her due to her temper. The groom also doubted whether he truly loved her or just felt sympathy and a sense of duty. But since he never had relationships with other girls, he had nothing to compare. His friend listened attentively and tried to dissuade Paul from marrying, warning him that he might make the biggest mistake of his life and be unhappy forever. However, Paul was determined, saying he couldn't leave a girl expecting his child. Besides, he believed that motherhood would change Jacqueline's character for the better, making her softer and calmer. In general, Paul hoped for the best, but he had no idea how wrong he was. In early 1993, the young couple welcomed their first child, a daughter named Danielle. 6 years later, Jacqueline gave birth to their son, Adam. Paul was the sole provider for his family, ensuring they lacked nothing. After the birth of their second child, the Krimbles decided to find a more spacious home and purchased a cozy 3-bedroom townhouse in Armagh, moving in 2000. By then, Paul held a senior mechanical engineer position, earning a solid salary. His wife, however, did not trouble herself with work, claiming she preferred managing the household and raising the children. However, she was not particularly good at either. Jackie was selfish, lazy, quick-tempered, and often showed aggression even towards her children. When the children grew a bit older, Jacqueline tried to find a job, but her quarrelsome and confrontational nature meant she never stayed employed for long. Furthermore, she spent nearly every evening at bars, consuming alcoholic drinks while her husband remained home with their daughter and son. Even when sober, Mrs. Crimble was not the most pleasant person, and under the influence of alcohol, she turned into a real fury. She not only provoked conflicts but also engaged in fights, used foul language, and behaved inappropriately with various men. Any remarks or requests to behave more modestly were met with aggression, and no one could predict what she might do next. Neighbors and family friends were aware of what was happening, and genuinely felt sorry for Paul and the children, who suffered the most from Jacqueline's antics. Since the family lived in a small, quiet town, many people knew about the young woman's escapades and tried to avoid her. Her bad reputation affected her husband and children, who faced repercussions from peers at school. Jackie led a wild lifestyle without trying to hide it, frequently visiting entertainment venues. However, her presence there frightened not only other patrons but also the staff, who knew that her arrival inevitably meant a conflict or fight. Jacqueline kept her family in fear because she could lash out at them at any moment. Paul tried not to complain about the situation, but his friends, family, and colleagues noticed his discomfort around his wife, or even just mentioning her. He was often advised to leave this woman, but Paul feared losing the chance to see his children. In any argument, Jackie would immediately threaten to cut him off from their daughter and son. She also threatened to harm him by involving her acquaintances. These were men she regularly met at bars, who were ready to commit crimes for her sake. Paul usually yielded to his wife in such situations and kept silent. The mysterious attack on Sunday morning, June 20th, 2004, a frightened woman called the emergency services, pleading for help. She claimed that 3 strangers attacked her and her husband in their home, beating them, tying them up, attempting to rob them, and then driving away with their car, taking her husband with them. The caller was Jacqueline Crimble, and police officers and medics immediately rushed to the address she provided. At the house, they found a woman with her hands tied behind her back with a plastic cable tie. However, her legs were not bound, leading the authorities to believe she had managed to partially free herself. Notably, the victim had no injuries or bruises on her body, even though she initially claimed that the attackers had beaten and tied them up. Fortunately, the couple's children were not at home, as they had been sent to spend the weekend with their paternal grandparents. According to Jacqueline, the previous evening on Saturday, she and her husband had gone to a bar to relax. They drank and returned home after midnight. However, as Paul was opening the front door, 3 figures suddenly jumped out of the darkness and pushed them inside the house. The intruders, brandishing a gun, tied up the couple, beat them, and demanded money and prohibited substances. Allegedly, Paul tried to reason with the criminals, begging them to release him and his wife and promising not to call the police, but this only angered them. They hit him several times and then began to strangle him with a plastic bag in front of the terrified Jacqueline. When it became clear that there was no cash or prohibited substances in the house, the intruders decided to at least steal the car, but for some reason took the owner with them, leaving the bound woman behind. After the criminals drove away with Paul, Jacqueline managed to reach the phone and call the police using her tongue. She was sure her husband might still be alive and begged the detectives to find and save him immediately. However, despite her distress, the woman appeared and acted suspiciously calm, though the authorities had no reason to distrust her at that moment. The mutilated body in the trunk of the couple's car was immediately reported missing throughout the county, and investigators began collecting evidence at the crime scene. They tried to gather any details about the attackers, but Jacqueline claimed that the criminals wore masks. She couldn't recall any distinguishing features like clothing details, speech defects, limping, or anything similar. All she could say was that there were 3 of them and they were men. By Monday morning, less than a day after the search began, the Crimble family car was found abandoned just 3 miles from the house where the attack had taken place. It was parked in a deserted alley next to a long, vacant house. Inside the trunk was the mutilated body of its owner, bearing clear signs of beating and torture. The 35-year-old man's hands were tied behind his back, his legs bound with a cable tie, and his face and body covered with numerous bruises. When Jackie was informed of the gruesome discovery, she reacted surprisingly calmly. It seemed the brutal deprivation of her husband, the father of her children, didn't bother her much. She tried to feign surprise and pain but couldn't muster a single tear and literally asked when she would get her car back within a minute. This all appeared very suspicious, prompting law enforcement to take a closer look at the young widow. The main suspect initially, Jacqueline's version was not questioned and was considered the only credible account. However, the strange behavior of the widowed mother of two led law enforcement to suspect she might be lying. Soon it was revealed that her marriage to Paul had been falling apart for a long time, and she was never a model wife and mother. Not only neighbors and acquaintances spoke poorly of her, but even her children and parents. It also came to light that Jackie had been seeing a man named Roger Ferguson for several months. He owned a farm in Armagh where he lived with his mother. She and Crimble were often seen together in various entertainment venues in town, drinking alcohol. Moreover, Roger visited the married woman at her home when her husband was at work and the children were at school and daycare. Just the day after the car with the disfigured body was found, Jacqueline went from victim to the main suspect, and Roger was considered a possible accomplice. The woman did not appear to be a grieving widow and was much more concerned about getting her car back. Furthermore, her account of an attack by a gang of armed addicts sounded implausible. Nothing like this had ever happened in the quiet town before, and where had they gone after abandoning the vehicle with a body in the trunk? Additionally, the mysterious criminals managed to leave no traces, which was also strange. There were no other witnesses who saw suspicious strangers in town. However, almost everyone who ever interacted with the victim spoke negatively about her. Moreover, it soon emerged that the deceased man had an insurance policy and his wife could expect a large payout of £300,000 sterling in the event of his passing. Now, a real motive had appeared in this case which could explain the crime. Investigation into the crime. Jacqueline claimed she managed to call for help by dialing on a button phone with her tongue. The device was taken for examination, and indeed, traces of her saliva were found on it. However, at the initial crime scene inspection, investigators noted the phone was on the coffee table face down. With her hands tied behind her back, there was no way she could have turned it over after the call or dialed for help if it was in that position from the start. The couple's home computer search history revealed strange queries. Someone had been looking for information on life insurance, payout amounts, and procedures in the event of the policyholders passing for months. When Jacqueline was directly asked about this, she said she knew nothing and suggested that perhaps Paul was interested in it. Roger Ferguson, who was considered a potential accomplice in the crime, had a rock-solid alibi. His mother claimed he spent the night at home because he wasn't feeling well, and around 1:30 in the morning, she was searching the home medicine cabinet for something to treat his stomach issues. Despite the elderly woman's convincing testimony, they didn't remove her son from the suspect list just yet. Police decided to track the suspect's locations on the night of the crime through their cell phone signals, discovering that Roger had not been home as his mother claimed. Instead, he was at the Crimble's house where he stayed for several hours. Additionally, he continued his relationship with the widowed woman, and they were seen together at a bar the day after Paul's funeral. Another curious detail was that Jacqueline and Roger visited a car dealership together, where they were looking at SUVs and inquiring about installment plans for such an expensive purchase. Roger's mother was even with them, which seemed even more suspicious. The police suspected that the lovers had already planned how they would spend the insurance payout after Paul's passing, and Roger's mother was likely aware. However, during interrogations, Jackie insisted she never cheated on her husband and certainly didn't wish him harm, but no one believed her anymore. Shortly before the tragedy, Jacqueline had started working as a caregiver in a nursing home, but lasted only a few weeks before being fired due to constant conflicts and lies. Nevertheless, she didn't tell her husband, continuing to pretend she was going to work or had night shifts while staying at Ferguson's house. The deception was accidentally revealed when Paul met one of his wife's former colleagues, who told him everything. He tried to talk to his wife, But this only sparked another argument. She threatened to leave him for her lover, take the children, and forbid their biological father from approaching them. This was Paul's biggest fear, so he agreed to compromise and turned a blind eye to her infidelity. He could only confide in his closest friend, who later testified in court as a witness, recounting Paul's words. The development and execution of a devious plan. Roger wasn't particularly smart. He was strong, but somewhat simple-minded and easily led. Jacqueline quickly managed to completely dominate him, manipulating her lover to do her bidding. He would readily get into a fight for her, which flattered her immensely. He was likely genuinely in love with her and believed everything she said. The woman complained to Ferguson about her husband, accusing him of being rude, cruel, and even physically abusive. Naturally, this was all lies, but with each complaint, the lover grew to despise Paul more, believing he was harming and oppressing Jacqueline, and was the main obstacle to their happiness together. She implanted the idea in his mind that by eliminating her husband, all their problems would be solved, allowing them to be together while receiving a substantial sum of money for a comfortable life. About 2 weeks before the tragedy, Mrs. Krimble tried to find people willing to commit the crime for money, but after considering several options, she and Roger abandoned the idea. It seemed the lovers decided they could carry it out themselves without leaving evidence or witnesses, ensuring they kept the entire insurance payout. On Friday, June 18th, Jacqueline took the children to stay with their grandparents for the weekend. On Saturday, she suggested that her husband go out for drinks to relax and talk. Paul gladly accepted the offer, thinking it might help their relationship. He didn't realize it was an invitation to his demise. That night, people in the bar noticed Jackie trying hard to get her non-drinking husband intoxicated. She bought drinks and practically forced him to knock back one shot after another, then led her staggering husband out of the bar after midnight. They were caught on surveillance cameras, and that was the last time Paul was seen alive. This revealed a significant timing discrepancy. The bar was a 10-minute walk from the couple's home, and the attack occurred immediately upon their return, lasting no more than 15 minutes, according to Jacqueline. After that, her husband was supposedly kidnapped and driven away in their car, and she immediately called the police. However, about an hour and a half elapsed between the time they were captured on camera and the call to the police. Investigators believe this time was spent by the perpetrators covering their tracks and staging the scene of an attack by third parties. Moreover, Jacqueline apparently intentionally got her husband drunk so he couldn't resist. According to her, the criminals kicked Paul while he was down, then began to strangle him by placing a plastic bag over his head and securing it with tape. The nature of the injuries on the deceased's body confirmed her account, but the police were nearly certain by then that the assailants were she and her lover, Ferguson. Incontrovertible evidence. After a long and thorough examination of the crime scene, detectives found a partially erased footprint of a man's shoe, which had been obviously attempted to be cleaned, but poorly. The tread pattern matched Roger's shoes, but this evidence could be considered circumstantial. However, there were other, more substantial pieces of evidence against the criminal couple. In the kitchen trash, a cigarette butt with Roger's saliva was found, and on the cable tie that bound Jacqueline's hands was a partial fingerprint of his. Moreover, on the ties binding the deceased's hands and feet, Ferguson's fingerprints were present, and on the bag used to suffocate the victim, sweat and oil traces of both lovers were found. The investigation also uncovered another participant in this brutal crime, a minor acquaintance of Roger named Colin Robinson. Roger called him on the night of the attack, asking for a favor to help with something unspecified. The teenager drove his car, left it at the end of the street at Roger's request, and walked to the house to avoid attracting attention. When Colin realized what was happening, he wanted to run, but Roger intimidated him, and by threatening with a knife, forced him to help move the body to the car and load it into the trunk. Afterward, they drove the car to a deserted place and abandoned it. Initially, the frightened young man denied his involvement in the crime, but he broke down during the second interrogation and began to confess, trial, and sentence. The investigation lasted several months. During this time, they gathered undeniable evidence, interviewed all witnesses, and obtained a confession from the third participant in the crime. However, The trial of the criminals only began in the spring of 2007, almost 3 years after Paul Krimble's deprivation of life. On May 7, 2007, Jacqueline and Roger were found guilty of a premeditated crime with the intent to obtain insurance money. The widow was sentenced to 20 years in prison, while her lover and accomplice received 18 years. The young accomplice, Colin Robinson, was sentenced to 3 years for assisting the criminals and attempting to cover up the truth. Roger's elderly mother also couldn't escape responsibility for perjury and providing a false alibi for her son. However, considering the woman's advanced age and her serious health problems, she was given only a year of probation. Revenge on her own children. Even in prison, Jacqueline continued to ruin her family's lives. She was angry that no one supported her in court and that everyone who knew her personally was relieved when she went behind bars. Even her own mother said that people like Jackie should be isolated from society forever so that they can't harm anyone. Interestingly, a few days after the funeral, Jacqueline burned all of her late husband's belongings and photos, so nothing in the house reminded her of him. Danielle somehow managed to save a couple of photos with her father. She kept them in her bedside table, and her mother simply didn't know about them. The insurance payout of £300,000, for which Paul was assassinated, went to his children. Danielle and Adam lost both parents overnight, but their troubles didn't end there. Their mother was adamantly against either her parents or the murdered husband's parents raising the children. She did everything to deprive them of guardianship rights, so the children ended up in foster care despite having living grandparents. At the time of the tragedy, Danielle was only 11, and her brother Adam was barely 5. Jacqueline managed to retain her parental rights and attempted to manipulate her children from prison. Specifically, she wanted them to publicly declare her innocence using various pressure tactics. For example, she promised to sign permission for their school trips if they visited her in prison, but she deceived them. During the visit, she demanded they testify in her favor, and refused to sign the document. As a result, the brother and sister were the only ones who couldn't go on weekend excursions with their class. Now Danielle is 31, living in Basingstoke, working in a daycare, and dating a man named Simon Bryce, who is an engineer. Her brother, now 25, has a good education and moved to London. Jacqueline is set to be released next year, and her adult children are seriously worried that their mother will continue to do everything possible to poison their lives. According to statistics, the number of crimes committed by juveniles has been increasing worldwide in recent years. There has been an upsurge in violence among school children, usually directed at their peers, and the victims are often hospitalized, disabled, or even killed after such incidents. Such hostile acts usually have one goal: to prove their own superiority, power, and permissiveness. Plus, the laws of many countries are lenient to juvenile offenders, which gives them faith in their impunity. The story of a French girl named Agnes Marin, who died at the hands of a high school student, shook the whole country. They studied in a prestigious college with an impeccable reputation, in which it seemed nothing like this could not happen. However, as it soon turned out, the perpetrator had attacked the girls before, but his wealthy parents managed not only to keep the case quiet, but also to arrange a son in a good school in another city, hiding the truth about his adventures. It is said that teenage aggression is a form of protest during the period of personality formation and search for oneself. But in our story today, this boy's cruelty was the result of a complete lack of empathy, the ability to empathize and sympathize with others. He was extremely dangerous to society and incorrigible, and therefore became the second teenager in French history to be sentenced to life imprisonment. Who was Agnes Marin? Agnes Marin was born in 1999, November 26th in Paris, and was the only child of the couple Paula and Frederick Marin. The girl grew up in a fairly well-to-do family. Parents adored their child and sought to give her all the best. Agnes, from an early age, did not know anything to refuse. She was dressed in brand-name stores, taken to the sea, bought expensive toys and gadgets. Marin was an active, sociable, and restless child. She always had a lot of friends and hobbies. She showed creativity, loved music and movies, and in the future dreamed of becoming a film director. At school, she studied well, and teachers noted her high abilities. but often to achieve the best results, she was prevented by banal laziness and inattentiveness. At the age of 13, Agnes got involved with a bad company, which negatively affected the girl's studies and behavior. She started smoking, and not only regular cigarettes, drinking alcoholic beverages and skipping school. Her parents were not in favor of harsh measures of upbringing, and several times tried to simply talk to their daughter, but the conversations did not lead to anything. The girl promised to correct herself and to stop communicating with bad company, but she lied. When she was once again caught smoking and drinking beer right on the territory of the educational institution, the question of her expulsion arose. Her parents realized that if their daughter stayed in Paris, she would continue to socialize with people who had a bad influence on her, and nothing would change. Therefore, Frederick and Paula decided to transfer Agnes not just to another educational institution, but to send her to another city or even a province, away from the capital's bustle and temptations. A new school. After reviewing several options, Morin's parents opted for a closed private college, Savignol, located in the commune of Le Chambon-sur-Lignon, which is in the department of Upper Loire region of Auvergne. It is a prestigious educational institution with almost a century of history. The college was founded in the 30s and worked on the principle of boarding school, where children not only studied but also lived. However, by the end of the 2000s, the college faced serious financial difficulties and was actually teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. In a small community with a population of only 2,500 people, young people increasingly sought to go to study in the capital or a major city, and therefore the local educational institution experienced a shortage of students and, as a consequence, a shortage of finances. Previously, to get into this college required a high grade point average as well as good characteristics. But even this did not guarantee admission because the competition was several people for one place. However, in 2011, that changed dramatically. Due to a large shortage of students, the school, in order not to go completely bankrupt, significantly reduced the requirements for admission, especially if they were children of wealthy parents who were willing to act as sponsors. Despite her behavioral problems, Agnes had a good academic record and grade point average, which allowed her to get into Savignol College, and the authorities simply turned a blind eye to her characteristic. Agnes' parents were happy. They believed that the change would be good for their daughter. She would become more responsible and more easily overcome such a difficult transitional age. Maren was a very sociable, cheerful, and friendly girl. She was able to fit into the new team from the first days. She felt comfortable and quickly made friends. In addition, she showed good progress in her studies, including in new disciplines, which were not available in her previous school in Paris. Her parents visited their daughter at the boarding school every 2 or 3 weeks. They were very pleased with her successes, as well as changes in behavior for the better. Agnes came home to visit only once during her studies. It should be noted that the new school was located on a vast territory surrounded by forest. There were no clear boundaries, fences, and strict security, because the crime rate in these parts was considered one of the lowest in the country. To get from the college to the center of the town of Le Chambon-sur-Lignon required no more than a quarter of an hour on foot, so students after school often went there in groups. But before 5 o'clock in the evening, all had to return back. There were disciplinary penalties for breaking the rules. The disappearance of a student on November 16, 2011, Agnes, together with some of her classmates, decided to take a walk into town after class. There she met a friend of hers, who studied in another school, but they often crossed paths and constantly called each other. The two girls decided to go shopping and fell behind the general company. A couple hours later, the young people returned to campus, but Maren was not with them. At first, this circumstance did not cause much alarm, and everyone was sure that she would soon return. But the time passed, it began to get dark, and the absence of the students seriously worried the teachers. Her phone was switched off, and she could not be found on campus, so the school management did not hesitate to report the incident to the police. The search began that evening and was conducted by law enforcement officers, teachers, and students of the school. They were divided into groups, each of which combed a different area, but no trace of the missing girl could not be found. No one had seen her and had no idea where she might be, but everyone hoped that she would return alive and unharmed. Maren's parents were notified almost immediately and asked if their daughter had returned home. Frederick and Paula were shocked at the news and rushed to Luchambon-sur-Lignon as fast as they could. They assured them that Agnes could not have run away, for she had no reason to do so and had nowhere to go. According to them, their daughter liked her new school very much. She had made many friends here. She did not feel any discomfort, and she had no conflicts with anyone. The father and mother of the missing Agnes became actively involved in the search. They talked to their daughter's friends, posted pictures of her all over the city asking for help in finding her, and tried to find any clues or leads. What is Agnes' friend hiding? The first thing the police did was to look for people who were the last people to see the missing Agnes and who might have known about her future plans. Girls from her class said that Maren met a friend of hers in the city and went shopping with her, but no one could give her name. However, soon, the law enforcers managed to find Estelle, the same friend from another school. The girl was indeed the last person with whom Agnes had been in contact, so she was considered as a very valuable witness. However, she did not provide any useful information at the first interview. She said that had helped her choose a birthday present for her father. Then they had a milkshake each and said goodbye. Estelle headed for her home, and Agnes had to return to campus. The girl's story sounded plausible, but her behavior seemed a bit odd. She was visibly nervous and seemed to be holding something back. They decided to talk to her again, and suddenly, the story she had told began to take on some details that she wanted to keep quiet. Estelle confessed that Agnes had planned to meet a young man that day, a man she had not told her the name of. Allegedly, it wasn't supposed to be a date, but the guys were going to do something bad, apparently taking illegal substances. A couple hours later, Estelle tried to call Agnes, but she didn't answer, and by evening, her phone was turned off. The girl admitted that she lied at the first interrogation, because Maren asked her not to tell anyone about the meeting with the mysterious guy, and she promised her that. However, when it became known about the disappearance of Agnes, Estelle decided to confess everything, because she suspected that the sudden disappearance could be associated with this young man. It has been suggested that Agnes may have simply run away from college. The girl may have fallen in love and is now spending time with her secret boyfriend. Her phone was last online on campus the day she disappeared, but the device was turned off afterward and it was impossible to locate it. Nevertheless, police officers were able to quickly access all data regarding Agnes' calls and correspondence. It was then that the name of a 17-year-old Matthew Molinas, a high school student at the same school as the missing Maren, first came to the attention of the police, the first suspect. It turned out that the missing woman for the last few days corresponded with Matthew Molinas, but what could connect her with a 17-year-old young man? What interests they could have in common? In any case, the boy had to be questioned, because he could have valuable information and shed light on the case. Nothing concrete or alarming in their correspondence could be found, but on the day of Agnes' disappearance, they were really going to meet on campus and walk together. Matthew promised to show her something, but did not specify what it was. Moulin was first invited to talk to the police on November 17th. He behaved perfectly calm, but there were strange scratches on his face and hands that looked quite fresh. However, the young man admitted that he was dabbling in illegal substances, and yesterday he specifically overdid it, which caused him to lose consciousness and fell into a thorny bush where he lay for several hours. Classmates and educators confirmed that there were indeed problems with this student. Matthew was admitted to Savignol College in January 2011. His parents transferred him here to supposedly protect him from bad company and problems. However, the young man even here used alcohol and various illegal substances, which raised the question of his expulsion. But he still felt sorry for him and was given time to improve. Molinas looked like a typical rebel and troubled teenager. It was as if he challenged those around him with his appearance and behavior. He wore Gothic-style clothes, smoked and drank hot drinks right on the campus. He bragged about his antics to his peers, noting that he would not be punished for it. On the day of Agnes' disappearance, Matthew disappeared for several hours. Toward evening, he came out of the woods in dirty clothes, with scratched face and hands, and to all questions he answered that he had had too much to drink and was passed out. Naturally, it all looked and sounded suspicious, but so far there was no hard evidence against him, and therefore the investigators decided to take a closer look at him. The spoiled son of rich parents Matthew Molinas was born in December 1993 in the municipality of Nijai Salorg, in Garda, and was the eldest of 3 children of the couple Sofia and Dominique Molinas. He grew up with his 2 younger sisters in a fairly well-to-do family, and from childhood was used to having his every whim immediately fulfilled. From an early age, he was observed some strange things. The boy was quite aggressive, irascible, hard to find a common language with peers, and tried to stay apart from other children. In adolescence, the situation worsened. Matthew had outbursts of rage, he often started fights, began to drink alcohol regularly, and experimented with all sorts of illegal substances. But at the same time, despite his aggression and antisocial behavior, the young man had a very attractive appearance, thanks to which he became popular with the opposite sex. At the time of the described events in his hometown, he had a girlfriend, about whom his parents knew, and whom he visited on weekends. Matthew had a number of records with the police, including the theft of prescription drugs from a pharmacy, which he committed with a friend. But the case was hushed up, probably thanks to money from the teenager's parents. He was also able to get into a prestigious private school with a low grade point average and problems with the law, because his father offered to sponsor the school when it was in crisis. During interrogations, Molinas behaved defiantly and arrogantly, but remained completely calm, so that the police even doubted his involvement in the disappearance of Agnes. The guy was constantly twirling a yo-yo in his hands, his favorite toy, with which he never parted. At the first interrogation, he claimed that he did not know Agnes, but when he was shown a printout of their correspondence, he began to change his testimony, trying to lie on the fly, but quickly became confused in his own words. According to the guy, he promised to show Agnes a clearing in the forest, where mushrooms grow. Allegedly, they used them together, and after Matthew became ill, and he fell into a thorny bush, where he lay until the evening, and when he woke up, he saw that Maren was not. He didn't go looking for her, but just went back to the campus, because it was getting dark. A lawyer hired by the parents of the Molinas was present at all the interrogations, and recommended that his young ward show the place where he had last seen Agnes, and where they, according to him, used mushrooms. However, Matthew said that he would not be able to find that clearing because they stumbled on it by accident, and he got out of there on autopilot, not really understanding where he is and what is happening around. But Matthew's words were soon refuted by experts who found no traces of mushroom ingestion in his blood. Moreover, the scratches on his body were recognized as a consequence of a struggle. That is, someone scratched him with nails, and apparently it was a girl. A gruesome discovery in the thicket. The students of the school who had seen Matthew coming out of the woods that evening pointed out the direction from which he had appeared, and it was in that part of the woods that it was decided to make a large-scale, thorough search. At that time, there was still a faint hope of finding Maren alive. But on November 18th, searchers awaited a terrible discovery. In a small clearing, hidden in a dense thicket, was found badly mutilated and partially charred body of the missing Agnes. Her clothes were torn, her underwear was missing. There were all the signs of violence as well as traces of penetrating stab wounds. Doubt that this heinous crime committed by Molinas, no one had no doubt. But it was necessary to wait for the conclusion of forensic experts, as well as to obtain confessions from the killer himself. Actually, when Matthew was told about the terrible discovery, he did not particularly repudiate and began to testify, telling how everything was confessions of a ruthless killer. The strangler confessed that he deliberately lured Agnes into the woods to abuse her, but allegedly did not plan to kill her. However, she put up fierce resistance, scratched him, so he had to tie up the victim using the rope from his favorite toy, yo-yo, which he carried with him everywhere. Agnes screamed and threatened to turn him into the police, which pissed the guy off. Going to prison, he did not want to, and therefore decided to kill the unfortunate and get rid of the body. Matthew brutally beat Agnes, breaking her arm, nose, several ribs and shin, and then gave her 17 stab wounds, most of which came to the neck, face, and chest. When the victim stopped showing signs of life, he doused her with a flammable mixture from a canister and set her on fire, hoping that the fire would completely destroy the body. Then he quickly left, because it started to get dark and he did not see that the fire was soon extinguished. He took his toy off the dead body and took it with him, The high school student told about the incident calmly and in detail, as if savoring every word and watching the reaction of the detectives. He felt no remorse or pity for the victim. The examination confirmed that under the fingernails of Agnes were particles of skin and epithelium Matthew, and in her body revealed traces of biological fluid of the rapist. Also on the rope of the very toy yo-yo found sweat traces of both the perpetrator and the victim. After all the necessary studies and medical conclusions, Agnes' body was given to her parents, who buried their only daughter in Paris. It is noteworthy that the funeral took place on November 26, 2011, on her birthday. The first victim of a young psychopath. When law enforcers thoroughly took up the biography of Molinas, they were shocked by the fact that Marin was not his first victim, but this information was carefully tried to hide. As it turned out, he had been cruel to others since childhood, bullying animals, other children, and even his own sisters. He always took an incomparable pleasure in hurting others and watching them suffer. In August 2010, Matthew attacked his young neighbor Julia, with whom he knew since childhood. The girl showed interest in the handsome neighbor, and he decided to take advantage of it. The guy lured her into the woods, where he hit her on the head, and while the victim was disoriented, tied her up with scotch tape taken from the house, and then abused the unfortunate. Molinas then began to strangle her and probably would have killed her. But suddenly her cell phone rang. The perpetrator recoiled, looked around, and simply left the scene. A terrified Julia managed to free herself and called her parents, who immediately reported the incident to the police. Matthew was arrested the same day. During interrogations, he cried, trying to appease the police, and also made attempts to shift all the blame on the victim, claiming that she herself provoked him, teasing and hinting at intimacy. But law enforcers understood that he had prepared for the crime in advance, and even took duct tape with him to immobilize the victim. Nevertheless, despite the gravity of the crime, Matthew was not punished. The court took into account the very young age of the perpetrator, and instead of prison sent him for compulsory treatment in a psychiatric clinic, where he spent only 4 months. All this time psychologists and psychiatrists worked with him and evaluated his condition. In December 2010, the chief specialist, who was in charge of Molinas, gave a conclusion that he was fully rehabilitated, and after the course of therapy, he no longer posed any threat to others. The court, after reading this report, released the offender, requiring him only to attend several anger management sessions. Parental patronage. It is worth noting that the Molina couple also put a lot of effort into getting their son released. They promised the judge that Matthew would leave the region and not cause any more trouble, and they also said that they would make sure that the heir would undergo therapy. They hired the best lawyers who did everything possible to keep their client out of jail. After that, the parents started looking for a new school for their son, but since he had a criminal record for such a serious article, they did not want to accept him anywhere. Then the father personally went to the provincial closed college Savinol and made an appointment with the director. He knew about the financial problems of the institution and immediately offered to sponsor him. When it came to the admission of Matthew to the college, the director noted that the guy is too low academic performance, and the criminal case of a potential student could hit hard on the reputation of the school. But Dominic Molinas in every possible way vindicated his son, lying that there was no violence, just his ex-girlfriend so tried to get back at him after the breakup. Allegedly, that's why he was released a few months later, when everything was sorted out. Surprisingly, but the leadership of the educational institution did not go into the details of the trial and accepted the version told by Dominic. Apparently, the amount of sponsorship he had announced played a decisive role, and they simply turned a blind eye to the crime and withheld this information from other students and their parents. The trial and the verdict. Matthew had taken Agnes' life only a month before he turned 18. However, he was a minor at the time of the violent and brutal crime, and therefore the law provided for a lighter sentence for such offenders, and the trial itself had to be held in private. Agnes' parents insisted on making the sessions open, at least partially, with the involvement of journalists who would cover the case in the media. However, the Morin couple were refused, and the trial was held behind closed doors. The proceedings began only on June 18, 2013. The public prosecutor harshly criticized the numerous omissions in the case of Matthew. In particular, The fact that the psychiatrist who gave the conclusion that the guy is not a threat to others was a young girl who did not have the proper qualifications. She had no previous experience with criminals and made a fatal mistake. The defendant underwent a second psychiatric examination, and experts concluded that not only is he unrepentant, but he may well commit a similar crime again if given the opportunity. Matthew himself confirmed this, stating that he enjoyed watching the victim suffer. Mullins was diagnosed with symptoms of schizoid and paranoid disorder, which together with outbursts of uncontrolled aggression made him extremely dangerous to others. However, he was fully aware of his actions and could be held responsible for them before the law. Moreover, the prosecutor insisted that the young man be tried as an adult due to the brutality of his crime, and his request was eventually granted. On June 28, 2013, Matthew was found guilty of abuse and murder with particular cruelty. He was sentenced to life imprisonment and forced psychotherapy. He became the second juvenile offender in French history to receive such a sentence. On June 10, 2014, a jury of appeals upheld the life sentence, ending any possibility of a review of the decision. In 2016, Matthew's parents wrote and published a book in which they described their bitter experience and admitted that their son remains unrepentant. If you made it this far, thank you for staying with me until the end. I hope the stories gave you something to think about, or dream about. Sleep well, stay safe, and don't forget to subscribe. Good night.